Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Let it go.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. Great to be back this week. My very special guest is Arthur Klym. How are you, Arthur?
I'm doing very well, Peter. I hope all's well with you too.
Very well. It's a bit of a deja vu, isn't it?
Yes, it
Those who
is.
are regular viewers of the channel will notice that you're back again.
Yeah. And
So
actually, go
ahead.
I was going to say, and they actually can probably see me and hear me, let's hope.
Yeah, loud and clear. And those watching, please give us a little heads up. Is the the audio okay? Is the vision okay? And I just want to thank you, Arthur. As just those that are watching, as I said, regular viewers will note that we were here last week, but we were plagued with technical issues on the audio, and so Arthur went out and invested in the show by buying a microphone and a new cam, and I really appreciate it, Arthur. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for the advice because it looks like it's going to work well.
Yeah, it's great. And I really enjoyed our conversation. And we were following some bullet points. So we're just going to kind of go through those again and, unpack them the same as last time, but without the distractions. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're live on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And some of you may have noticed my slightly updated intro there with a little bit of the clapperboard saying subscribe. So highly would love if you guys didn't mind, subscribing to the channel. It really helps. And if you enjoyed the music that was playing there at the beginning, it's from my album Standing at the Cross, which you can listen to on Spotify. And if you'd like to support with donations, which really help keep the lights on here, you can go to that QR code, or I'll leave one up the top there the whole time. You can just click on any time during the show, or just simply go to, where is it? Here we go. If you just go along to paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music, you can make a donation. And there's been some donations made this week. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, Arthur, let's begin. Tell us your life story. The heading is, and it's episode 27. We've kept the same episode, so if people are looking back, it'll just basically replace the previous interview. Leaving Adventism with Arthur Klym. So we want to go back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about you, where you've come from, and what brought you to this moment in time.
All right. I was born into an Adventist family in the state of Oregon in the United States in the Pacific Northwest. And when I was the third of 6 children, and my mother was a 4th generation Adventist. My father was raised Catholic, and when he met and married my mother, he went to some evangelistic series with her and joined the church. And he was really pretty enthusiastic when in his early years, like so many new converts are. He used to pass out books and bother people on the sidewalk, that kind of thing. But by the time I came along, he wasn't doing that.
Oh.
I went to my early days, probably in the church, I would say, were more impacted by fear than anything else. I heard the usual stories at Sabbath school and church, and the part that really stuck out in my mind was, as probably in a lot of people growing up Adventists, and frankly a lot of Christians, the big concern was to be saved and go to heaven and not to be lost. Being lost was the scariest thing. The thought of that was really horrible. And I recall, and it was very clear, and we were taught, as all young Adventists are, that Jesus was coming very, very soon. If I escaped childhood, I was going to be lucky. Well, not lucky. I would be privileged, I guess. But I was at a point when I was a young child, if I was outside playing, and the clouds parted and there was light streaming through as it will, and kind of streaming through to the ground, I wasn't excited. I was frightened, extremely frightened, and was sure that I had, as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, that I had some unconfessed sin that I knew would cause me to burn in hell. Now, fortunately, and I'll say this, I appreciate to this day the fact that Adventism at least doesn't preach that you spend forever burning in hell, but you'll burn, and you'll be punished for your sins by burning. At least that's what Ellen White said in writings. So
I like how she adds that those who were greater sinners than others would burn longer.
Yes, that's right. And you'll burn long enough to pay for your sins. So that's right. Satan burns longest of all, Peter.
Yes.
So
yes.
I guess that's comforting. But my parents sent us to public school for my first couple of years, and I don't know, we might have stayed in public school, except I think the reason my parents took us out in the middle of my 3rd grade year and sent me to church school was because during my 3rd grade year, I came home one day and told Mom how much fun I was having at school because they were teaching us to dance. And I learned very quickly that I was not to be doing that, and that from that point on, I was to sit aside if that happened. And lo and behold, halfway through the school year, we found ourselves in church school and spent about a year and a half there before we went back to public school.
There's some interest. There's a funny joke about. Actually, I just realized I won't say what it is, but there is a funny joke about something potentially leading to dancing that Adventists, I think, to this day, are quite fearful of dancing.
Well, I'll be less fearful. I've heard a joke many times that say Baptists. The reason why Baptists won't have sex standing up is someone might see them and think they're dancing. I don't know if that's the.
It's very similar.
Very similar.
Mine has an Adventist replaced in it, and it might lead to dancing.
Yeah, there you go, Brad. That's okay.
Thank you for being less fearful.
Okay. All right. So even though my parents, sent us to church school for a year and a half, and then we went back to public school for what, 3 years, I was all in as a child. Really believed it. I believed everything I was taught, and from my earliest days, my goal when I was old enough to even say what I thought I might want to do for a living someday when I grew up was to be a minister, an Adventist minister, obviously. And my mother used to, if we were visiting with somebody who was of Adventist background, she loved to say, "Arthur, tell them what you want to be when you grow up." And she was very proud of that. And I was one of those kids who, I think of some years when I was in public school, at least 2 different times when evangelistic series came along, that I went every night. And I think of one in particular, I think it was 23 nights. And I went every night, got my free Bible as a result. But I think I was in 5th or 6th grade, and at this series, they happened to have available mimeographed copies of each sermon that was given. And I got a copy of each of those, and I had a binder with each of those sermons. And also during each service, I had a little notebook, and I wrote down every scripture that the pastor cited and looked them up later and to read them. And what I did was I took that binder with those sermons, and I don't know how often I did this, but I have a very clear memory of standing in a spare bedroom of ours that no one was using, and setting up a makeshift pulpit and preaching those sermons to a large number of stuffed animals. So I was practicing.
I remember hearing of theology students here just down the road from me at Avondale. There's a big paddock of cows nearby, and they would go and preach to the cows.
Yes.
And sure enough, I'd see them down there practicing during the week. And
Did the cows become Adventists? Turn into soybeans?
They certainly lived on Adventist soil. So
Yes.
it may have permeated.
Yes.
Oh dear.
Well, I will make a few more comments about being in public school. That one of the things that did trouble me about being Adventist is that I never felt part of the community in which I lived. And when I went to public school, I never felt part of the school fully. And we had more of those circumstances where during PE courses, physical education classes, there were sections, not all the time, but there might be a few weeks where they did some form of dancing. And so I had to sit aside with some Baptist kids and some people from other really conservative denominations while the other children did that. And I felt, you feel like you're a sore thumb and really stick out. I'm going to back up just a little bit more to when I was 8 years old. And one of the things that we found very, very frightening, my family did, I did, and everybody at the church did, in 1960, because that's when I was 8 years old, there was a candidate for president of the United States who became the Democratic nominee, John F. Kennedy. He was Catholic, and we knew that the end was right upon us, particularly if he got elected. It was a pretty scary time when he was elected, and it was a relief when, after he got in, when he did not take steps to bring in the Sunday laws, frankly. So.
I want to come to that a bit later, actually, to talk a little bit about the Sunday law and if there are still fears, if they are grounded still.
My sister, who's closest in age to me, like 21 months younger, says something that I don't really recall, but she says when President Kennedy was killed that my parents were happy about it. I don't remember that, but she says that's what she recalls. So
interesting. So there were, back in the day, your generation, my generation, there was a lot more fear associated with Catholicism than there is today, I think, perhaps amongst the younger people. I wonder if the more conservative people that are watching still uphold that more traditional anti-Catholic view. Let us know in the comments if you do.
Yes, I'd like to know that too. And as you know, the General Conference would like to take us back with that, with distributing what they want us to distribute, 1
A
billion,
billion.
was it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Whoa. Copies of great controversy.
Yeah.
But anyway.
That's gonna cause a bit of, tree chopping damage, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it will. Yes. Um, but during my years growing up, even though I had my fears, I was, I I was a happy kid. I loved the church, and I loved that. I thought how fortunate I was that I was born into a religion that was the truth,
Mm.
and that was, pretty lucky. Um, when I didn't get my mother was opposed to me getting baptized in the as young as so many kids were, and I didn't get baptized until I was like 14 years old. And I told this story last time, but people may not have heard it. My sister and I were baptized together, and it was such a relief to be baptized because I knew that at that point my sins were all forgiven.
Mm.
And I even fantasized just a bit, though it wasn't a strong ideation, but fantasized a bit that if we, on the way home, we were in an automobile accident, that I would go to heaven. I would be saved because my sins had been blotted out. Of course, it didn't take that long after getting home for my sister and I to wipe out the sinless part in terms of getting in some kind of spat or argument.
Yeah.
But there for this brief, shining moment, I was ready.
You were ready for heaven.
That's right.
Adventism is, in a nutshell, all about, he didn't come back, but he is coming back soon. A new kind of judgment has begun.
Yes.
Be ready. Prepare. Because if
You
you're not
don't
ready,
know.
you're not going.
That's right. And you don't know if your name might have just come up before the judgment seat or in the
Yeah.
sanctuary 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So your probation may have already closed, Peter.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing I can do either way.
Yeah.
I
The door
again,
has shut.
it's shut. I liked in our test program, you talked about the shut door, and in that tiny little promo that not promo, but the test run we did a couple of days ago, yesterday, lots of people were commenting on the shut door. We might get to the theological aspect of that later, but I'm interested again in those watching, because we do have a diverse audience here at SDAQ&A. If you're a more conservative Adventist, from the more historicist camp, do you still think can be summed up that easily, that Jesus didn't come back, but he is preparing there's a new phase of his ministry going on. He'll be back any day. We have to be ready. If we're not ready, we don't go
And
to heaven.
that caused me a lot of angst as a young child. Well, my paternal grandmother was Catholic, and she only lived about 5 miles from our house, and I would go with my dad to see her on occasion, and that troubled me. And realizing she was Catholic, it made me uneasy. They always spoke. My grandparents were Ukrainian immigrants. They always spoke Ukrainian when they were together, so I didn't really understand what they were saying, my dad
Right.
and his mother. But I still felt that maybe that made it feel worse. But she died when I was 5, so I didn't have to deal with that angst too
Okay.
far into my life.
Yes.
But it did trouble me.
Imagine if she had lived until you were in your 20s or so, and the kind of conversations you could have had with her as you traversed life and changed some of your views.
Yes.
Before we keep going, let's just bring up a couple of comments. Moto Sapien has said, glad to see the test run was a success. Those who don't know what that is, because we'll delete it soon. We had problems last week, and we're doing a redo today. And so we did a bit of a test run yesterday. Gillian Ford has written, I'm not sure what this means, Gillian. You seem to be taken over by a group called Traverse Nocturne. Happened twice to me. This was on Facebook when I wanted to use YouTube. It stopped, I hope. Not sure what that is. Tell me more. And Moto Sapien has added, it's funny in a sad way that so many Adventists are anti-Catholic, when E.G. White said, let's have no more rude thrusts at the Catholics. That's interesting.
I'm going to leap forward a few decades, but it will come back to being the younger days because it makes me think of an incident as an adult, when I was at a Sabbath school in a church nearby here, where it happened to be within a few days of when the Pope was shot by a man from Turkey, I think.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and in the Sabbath school class, one woman spoke up and she said, my sons were laughing about that. And I kind of scolded them. She said, we know who he is, but he is a human being. And so we shouldn't laugh at him. And she thought she was being really open-minded. That didn't quite strike me that way. But
Yeah. Interesting take on it.
okay. Let's see. I'm looking here at notes that I made from listening to our last one.
Yes.
To the extent I could.
We want to try and keep on track with some of the same points that we discussed.
Yeah. Well, I went on. I think I mentioned I went back to church school my 8th grade and 9th grade years, and then I went away to a boarding academy. To Laurelwood Academy was the name of the school, but it also happened to be the school that my mother had graduated from. As it turned out, all 6 of us children graduated from the same boarding academy. So we were that was sort of our place. And I loved my years there. I know some people who complain about it, and of course there were things that they were pretty strict in a lot of ways, but overall I had a great time. I enjoyed my experience there. And people, with a few exceptions, the faculty and staff there were terrific. And I got along well with them, except as for the odd hiccups, as that will happen when you're a young man growing up to the age of, from 15 to 18. Yeah, well, that will happen, but it was a great experience. I told a story about being, when I turned 18, it was in 1970. And at that time, the Vietnam War was in full swing. There was talk of it winding down a bit, but they were still drafting a lot of people. The military draft was something that you had to register for right after you turned 18. And when I registered for the draft, there are several classifications you can try to get. Well, it's not hard to get the 1A, it was called. That's one where you just say, nothing to hold me back. I'm going to serve full bore. The Adventist Church emphasized and encouraged people to do what was called a 1AO, which was, I'll go in the military, I won't carry a gun, but I'll serve as a medic. And then there were a couple of other classifications. One was called 1O, which was a strict conscientious objector who said, I won't serve in any capacity. I'll go to jail. I'll go to prison before I'll serve, but I am willing to serve 2 years in some civilian position, maybe a hospital or something like that, at low to no pay, usually fairly low pay. And there was a fourth one which was 4F, which meant you couldn't go at all because you had some health issue.
Right.
The former president of the United States had shin splints, and he was a 4F, so he couldn't go. At least so the story goes. So anyway, that was Desmond Doss. Desmond Doss was a 1AO. He was one who was willing to serve. So the thing that's particularly interesting about that, the church did not encourage that. The church, it's a little surprising because back during the United States Civil War and in the First World War, Adventists took a much more pacifist view. And then when it came to World War II, they shifted. And it got more so as we went along into the Vietnam era. But when it became known among the faculty and the staff at my academy what I was doing, that I had applied for this 1O status, I got called into the principal's office. And the principal and vice principal were both there. It's a good cop, bad cop routine. They were going to see what they could do with me. They told me, they argued with me about, what I'd chosen to do and tried to dissuade me, and told me that in doing that, after it went on for a while, they told me that in applying for this, I was bringing shame upon the church by
the
not
church,
being willing to
the
serve.
church
Yes.
leaders said that.
Yes, this was the principal and vice principal at school, that I was bringing shame upon the church. Well, back even at the age of 18, I had a bit of a smart mouth. And at one point, the vice principal said, "What would happen if everybody had your attitude?" And that was such a low-hanging fruit. It was pretty easy to hit that one out of the park. Said, "Well, I guess there wouldn't be any war,
Anyway,
would there?" Yeah, he did not think that was particularly funny. So, but it was true. So,
yeah, that's right. If everybody took that stance, of course.
when you applied for that, it had to be approved by your draft board. There was a group of regular civilians who sat and reviewed all applications and decided how many people were going to be called from their district. And they did not just approve it out of the blue. They said, "You've got to come in and do an interview with us." That wasn't real common, but I didn't know anybody else who had applied for this, so I don't know whether that was a common thing or not. But I went to that meeting, and they did approve me. A few
Wow.
years later, a friend of mine, and they didn't tell me what the vote was or anything else, but it was 3 men I met with. Couple of years later, a friend of mine had to have a similar interview. He had initially signed up as a 1AO, and then when he had a low draft number, he changed his mind and decided that he did not think it was right to go to war. And I went with him while he went into his interview. Of course, I waited out in the lobby, and I had heard that you had a right to look at your file. It was your file, and you had the right to review it. And so I asked for it while I was waiting, and I looked through it, and I saw one of the letters in the file was written by the academy pastor. And he told, I don't remember how lengthy it was, but it wasn't a really short letter. He told them that they should deny me that status, and that the reason I was doing it, that I wasn't sincere, and the reason I was doing it was for popularity purposes.
Wow. Boy, so he was trying to put the knife in.
Yes, he was. And it's kind of funny because a few years later, he became the pastor at my parents' local church. And my mother was not shy about confronting people, and she confronted him about that. And he denied it. I'm not going to suggest he was lying. He probably didn't. He may very well not have remembered.
Yeah.
But she took him to task.
Yeah. Boy, that would have been a sensitive time.
It was.
And I imagine if people's views on taking this kind of stance that you did may have even had a lot of public pressure against you, suppression, ostracism, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Let's just have a quick look at a couple of the comments that have been coming in as we've been going along. Tim Humphreys. Hey, Tim. Good to see you. He's pointed out the Desmond Doss. He's called it a maneuver. Did you see the film about Desmond Doss?
Yes.
It was huge.
Well done.
Yeah, it was huge over here. Barry has written, it's not only Catholics, there is apostate Protestantism. When I went to school, I went to Anglican and Presbyterian scripture, which is probably why I'm a so-called liberal. And you feel free to comment on anything that I bring up. Motor Sapien, how are you, Motor Sapien, by the way? My growing up in the 90s was very similar to Mr. Klym's, with fear being a motive and ultimately rejecting it. Many seem to leave to other systems that are also fear-based, but with a different solution. That's an interesting point.
I know just a more of a humorous aside, when I watched the movie about Desmond Doss, and it was well done, I thought. He there was one scene where I think about the time he got married, that his wife, I believe his wife had a wedding ring. And I can tell you that at that time in the United States, that would not have happened.
That was a hot potato.
Yeah, that's right. Would not have. But hey, they take a little literary license in movies, and that was one.
Yes, interesting. The 3ABN is quite big here in Australia, and so much so that they even have their own only 10 minutes down the road, 5 minutes down the road, their own studio, beautiful studio. I've been there a few times, and the people are lovely. No complaints at all. They're a lovely bunch of people there, putting out media and resources that they truly believe in.
Yeah.
But I remember occasionally I was involved with music, where I was helping out with production. And whenever it was going to be aired on 3ABM, we had to go through the orchestra or the band or the people on the stage and just make sure that none of them were wearing wedding rings. And I thought it was so often I would be given the task, can you go and tell them not to wear wedding rings? And most people would go, nah, I'm keeping mine on, So I'd go, no worries, that's all right, just letting you know.
Here's a little humorous aside from my academy years. My friend and I, with whom I later became a literature evangelist, which we'll be getting to in a moment, he and I were reading this book. I think it was called The Power of Pentecost or something like that. And we were impressed by that and thought that the Holy Spirit was more accessible than we had been taught than we had heard or learned. And I was convinced, and I'd read texts before that said that if you were in a tight spot, and I think Moses was told this, if you're called upon, the Lord will give you words to speak. You're in this tight spot. And I thought, I was asked to be a student week of prayer speaker. At probably most every academy and colleges, they have a student week of prayer, and they name a student to do one sermon each. And I was asked to do one. And so I decided that I was going to claim some of those promises about the help of the Holy Spirit. And so all I did was pray, and I did not do any preparation for that sermon. No notes, nothing.
Just went up.
And you can probably guess how well that went. And I learned a valuable lesson about don't be too literal. It may help to make a few notes along the way. It's somewhat embarrassing.
Well, even Moses had the bullet points that he brought down from Mount Sinai.
Plus, he had a few plagues in his back pocket he could pull out.
He could fill out as well.
I didn't have any of those.
There's a funny Monty Python skit. I think it's Life of Brian. I can't remember. And Moses is coming down the hill, and he gets down the bottom.
Yes.
He's carrying these 3 tablets. He goes, I give you the 15, and then one falls. The 10 commandments. I
think I don't want to be too contradictory. I think that might have been in History of the World Part 1 by Mel Brooks.
Oh, it might be.
I think it was, but I could be wrong. But that's my recollection. But that is one of the funniest things I've ever seen as well. Hilarious.
and that Mel Brooks movie is hilarious too. And yeah, you might be right. Having said that, I'd highly recommend everyone watch The Life of Brian. I think it's
one of my favorites.
Such a great movie.
You can't be. You need to loosen up and be willing to laugh at yourself.
Yes,
and laugh at some of the silliness that goes on in life.
Yeah.
Not take yourself too seriously.
He's not the Messiah. He's just a very naughty boy.
That's very good.
I love the one where there's like the whole crowd is going, we're all individuals, or something like that. And one voice pops up, I'm not.
Watch it, folks.
Watch it. Great movie. And yeah, you've got to don't take it personally. Yeah. A lot of people take criticism of their beliefs personally, and I never have. So I struggle. I struggle because I'm often challenging people's beliefs in the show, but people say, oh, you've got a bias, you're trying to push people a different way. No, I just like to find out what people believe, why they believe it, but I also like to see can they defend what they believe as well. Why, just as a little aside, why do you think there's such a close-knit connection with people's identity and what they believe? I guess I can see why, but it seems to me that I hope I'm able to kind of separate the two, and I go, well, here are my beliefs, and they shift and change. There's core beliefs that don't, but I'm not threatened. And I guess talking about Life of Brian, when you watch that, you'll be potentially, triggered all the way from the start to the finish if you're too precious with some of your beliefs. I don't know.
I think that it's a mark of, at some point, of a level of maturity when you're able to laugh at yourself and see some humor in everything. I see someone has commented enough of the Monty Python fest, LOL, but yeah, I think he thinks we're straying a bit from the Holy Grail. Or the pursuit of the Holy Grail.
Come back or I'll bite your kneecaps off.
Yeah. Well,
awesome.
moving along with the story, Peter, of my upbringing and where I've gone in my life. I did not. As I said, I had a pretty happy time, other than what is, I think, is fairly standard fear for a young person growing up who knows they're never going to be able to get married or have children of their own or have a career because Jesus is going to come back. Usually we thought, most of us didn't think it would be within the next year or two, but we thought it was pretty likely within 5, no more than 10. I think up until the time I left, I think that was pretty standard. Now, I don't know if it still is, but that was fairly standard. And but I had, other than those fears, I loved the church. I thought it was a great place. I thought it was the truth. And I thought I was, as I said before, very lucky to have been born into it. I think one of the first cracks that I had in that was when at the end of my senior year at my boarding academy, some conference brethren came in, and people from the Literature Evangelist Corps came in and gave a speech encouraging us to consider becoming literature evangelists. I often say call porters because that's what I grew up. That's the term we used growing up. In fact, I remember as a little kid what we always did. Every prayer, when I was a child, every prayer included the line, "Bless the missionaries and the call porters." So that comes to my lips pretty readily. But they came and encouraged us to give that a go. And my friend and I said, "Yeah, I think that'd be for us. Let's do that." So after the school year was over, they actually had a training for us at the school we had gone to. So that was handy. We went there, and I only actually lived, even though it was a boarding school, I only lived like 13 miles from the school. So that was very convenient. We went there for the training. And that's really when the first time I ever really started to have some serious questions about the institution. At that point, I didn't have any doubts about the beliefs, but I started to have some questions about the institution. When we were being trained, they told us that we were going to be working not for the Adventist Church, though it was clear that we were. No, it was Laurelwood Academy. If we have a question, it was at Milo. No, Milo, we wouldn't have wanted to go to Milo. I had an aunt who did. But let's see. Oh, we were working for the Home Health Education Service, an organization I had never heard of before, but who just happened to have an office in the same building as the Oregon Conference. So
interesting.
It was they were part of it, but they had a different name. And so we were taught that the way we were to get into the homes and begin our pitch was we knock on the door, and when the person answered the door, this is the line, and this may not be exact, but it's pretty close. Good morning. We're from the Home Health Education Service. We're in your neighborhood today taking a survey of religious attitudes and opinions. We'd like to know your opinion and your attitude, and we'd also like to get your opinion of a service we offer. And with that comment, we would gesture to our briefcase and pick it up and kind of start stepping toward the door. And if it had a screen door, we'd reach for the handle of the door. And remarkably, it worked a lot more often than it didn't. It might be harder today, but this was in 1970. And so, I think people were a little more trusting then. And so when we would get in, we had a series of questions we asked them, and it did have to do with religious attitudes and opinions. And it probably took about 5 minutes to do that survey. And then we would move over to a presentation of the books we were selling. And we were selling 2 books. One was The Desire of Ages, and the other one was a book called Your Bible and You, and I think it was by Arthur Maxwell. But at any rate, and I think you all know who wrote Desire of Ages, or who's reputed to have written it. Or whose
Marion
name is on
Davis.
it. Yes. And these were big, beautiful books. I mean, they were good-sized books, beautiful illustrations on the cover. Very expensive books. So expensive that if somebody were to buy them, most people had to buy them on a retail installment contract.
Wow.
Because they were just very expensive. And if the people had bought that day, we could throw in for free this big white family Bible with the hardcover. So, but anyway, moving back a little bit, we had a notebook that had plastic sleeves in it that we inserted pages, kind of like a primitive PowerPoint presentation. And we had that open in front of us, and then we would read it kind of upside down. It wasn't that complex, and we were used to it by then. And read it to them as they were reading it, and it had beautiful illustrations and the like. And it was kind of talking about how important these books were and how it would be helpful for them to read these books and to have them in their home. And at that time in U.S. history, J. Edgar Hoover was the name of the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was very popular at that time, very popular, one of the most well-respected men in the country. That the gloss kind of wore off a little later when people learned more about him, but he was popular. And one of these little inserts we had had a picture of him, big picture of him, with written in front of it a quote from him that said, "These books should be in every home."
Oh.
So that was a nice little twist. The only problem is I found out that quote was about the Bible stories by Arthur Maxwell, and we weren't selling those.
Yeah.
Maybe some literature evangelists were, but we weren't. We had these 2 books and the family Bible. That was it. We were not being allowed to or being asked to sell the Bible stories. They may have already hit that area with them and decided that wasn't the best way to go. Or maybe they left that to the hands of more experienced salesmen. I don't know.
It was a clever marketing trick either way.
It was a clever marketing trick. And we were taught to really push it hard and try to get people to buy these books with any way we could. Well, not legal way we could. And we were taught how to fill out these retail installment contracts. Well, my friend and I were not very good at this. We were 18 years old, and we didn't have that killer instinct isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. We didn't have the closing instincts that some older person may have had who had done more of this. And finally, after we were having some difficulty getting anywhere, our supervisors brought in a couple of heavy hitters to show us how it's done. And so my friend and I were each placed with one of these accomplished salespersons. And I went with this accomplished salesperson. I think one of the first places we went to, he got a sale just like that. And one of the ways he did it, we were talking to a young mother. She was very young. I'd guess she's in her probably 20 or so. And she had a young baby. She might have been in her early 20s, but she had a young baby. And this salesman kept kind of taking the tack that these books will really help you in being a good mother. And this woman kept saying she couldn't afford it, and that she really needed to talk to her husband about it. And he pressured her, and finally convinced her to sign on the dotted line. And I have to tell you that when we left that house, I did not feel elated that I'd just seen an accomplished sale. I felt kind of dirty. I felt like there was going to be trouble when her husband came home that night. This was in 1970. I think marriages were less equal. It got less egalitarian. I would like to think they're more egalitarian today, and that if I wanted to talk to my wife about whether or not I should buy something, it would be because I really wanted her opinion, not that she would be angry at me or vice versa. But I think in that circumstance, my guess is he was pretty angry when he got home that night. But that wasn't what we were there for. Just like we weren't there to. Oh, I left out one thing. That survey we took, we accumulated quite a few of those, and when we asked our bosses, what do we do with these surveys? Who do we give them to? You just throw them away. You're not there to take surveys. You're there to sell books. Well, that's what we told them. We were there to take a survey. And so, it struck me that we were lying to them. I did not like that. It made me very uncomfortable.
It was just another tactic.
Yes, it is a tactic. A humorous story that is that on our very first day as literature evangelists, at the very first house, my buddy and I went up to the door, knocked on the door. It was still morning. I usually don't like to get out too much in the morning when you're selling like that, but it was probably 10 o'clock or so in the morning. And this older lady answered the door, probably your age or my age, Peter. She seemed pretty old to us, but she answered the door. And she must have been a widow, or at least single, and she invited us in. So very first house, this woman invites us in, and she seats us at the kitchen table. And the first thing she does once we're seated at her kitchen table, we haven't had a chance to start with anything, the survey at all. And she goes and reaches above the refrigerator and grabs a bottle of wine and 3 glasses and brings it over and pours wine into all 3 glasses. We hadn't been trained to deal with that, and were aghast. And we were rescued because just then her son drove into the driveway to check on her. And she grabbed those glasses up very quickly and put them away. And we excused ourselves very quickly as well and went on to the next house. But that struck me as being so odd in the very first house.
You were confronted with a very interesting conundrum there.
Yes, we were. And I can tell you, neither he nor I had ever tasted anything like that. We were, whoa.
These techniques that were taught to you, a couple of things. Do you think they were localized to that? Was it Oregon that you were in? Was it just a kind of a random thing, or do you think that was the kind of thing back then that permeated all of the colporteurs training? I just, while you're thinking about that, I'll just say that because here in Australia and even overseas, any colporteur or literal evangelist that I've met, they're wonderful people. There's a great kind of team spirit about them. Other arms of the Adventist Church that spring to mind, along with the literature evangelists, are ADRA, Sanitarium Health Food Company. I really love the people within those groups, and in many ways, that they're just trying to feed their families. They've got good hearts. So I'm just interested in how systemic you think that kind of training was, and anyone that's watching now, do you think that kind of, if it is systemic, is it something that goes on today still? I think Terry Goltz wrote in our previous interview where we had the audio problems that what you were accounting isn't what actually happens today, and it may have been an isolated sort of situation in your part of the world. So having said all that, what are your thoughts?
Well, and I can't say for certain. I can only speak to my own experience, and I have known people in the past, not well, but I have met people in the past who had done that kind of work, and I had no reason to suspect they were anything but above board. But I can tell you that when we were going through our training, for instance, we were told and this was a conference official, the one in charge of that work in the conference. We were told that if somebody were to ask us the question, are these books of any particular denomination? Our answer was to be no. These books are for people of all denominations.
Right.
Well, that was kind of a sidestep. True in a perhaps literal sense, the second part of it, But the first part of it, the no, was not true because they asked us if they're of any particular denomination. And then we sidestepped it and answered a different question and misled. And whether I mislead you by telling you a bald-faced lie or mislead you by answering a question in a way that redirects or misdirects you, I don't think there's really a qualitative difference morally. Now, having said that, I don't want to tar all literature evangelists because I don't think that would be fair. But when they brought in these high-powered guys to show us how it's done, the fellow that they brought in, as I remember, had been working in Alaska, and he had come down to do some work in Oregon, and he was a very accomplished salesman. I mean, I got to watch him at work. He was very good, and he had all the skills that you would associate with a salesman, and employed them in ways that made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I was a
Yeah,
kid.
I'd be interested to hear others' thoughts on that. And no, I think Harley Southwell has written something about today with Cole Porters. So let's listen to Harley. Thank you for your comment, Harley Southwell. As someone who trains Cole Porters here in Australia today, I train them to answer that question with, "We are SDA. Have you heard of us?" with a big smile.
And I like to hear that. I think that's so much better. In fact, one time, as we were going to door to door, a gentleman invited us in, and he inquired more fully, and we didn't mislead him when he asked us pinpoint directly. We told him, and he pulled out Walter Martin's book, Kingdom of the Cults, and he said, "I've read this book, and Walter Martin says that you folks are not a cult, that a lot of people think you are, but you're not. And I think it would have been wiser if we had been told to answer directly and honestly, as we just have been told." Who did you say that's Terry? Did you say?
No, that was Harley. But
Harley.
Yeah, but Terry wrote last week a similar thing. Yeah,
that Harley wrote. I think that, first of all, and this doesn't have anything to do with morality, it wasn't necessary. But morally, it's wrong. And I think that approach that he's talking about, that Harley's talking about, I'm very pleased to hear that. I mean, there's no reason not to be upfront. But there's sort of a history in the church, and it goes way back, of being less than forthright about who we are, who Adventists are. For instance, about several years ago, but within the last 15 years or so, the local Adventist church of which we had been a member, and there are like 4 Adventist churches, 5 locally in my community, in the greater area. The church we had been a member of advertised a Revelation seminar, and with all the stuff about prophecy and come learn about all this, and the series was at the church, but in the ad, while it gave the address of the church, it did not give the name or say this is in this case, the River Haven Seventh-day Adventist Church. It did not say that. It just gave the address, and it may have called it it said auditorium and gives the address. When they pulled up, they were going to see what church it was, because the signs are plastered across the church. So maybe they thought, maybe it's just a habit. Maybe they thought that once somebody had invested the time to show up, might as well go inside and see what it's about. I don't have any idea what the thought process was, but it just struck us when we looked at that flyer, because we got one in the mail, I think, as well as seeing one in the newspaper. Just struck us as just a little bit strange.
Bit misleading. And
Yes.
and Harley might like to answer this, and I know Terry did last week in we'll call that our trial run with the tech issues. I mentioned, or you did, that a lot of even today, the Revelation seminars, the big health events that are run for the general public, don't have the word Seventh-day Adventist mentioned anywhere. That still appears to be the case. So Harley, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And Terry mentioned last time is the reason is, and I hope I'm quoting him correctly, but roughly speaking, the reason is that Adventists can sometimes be connected and associated with JWs who believe in the giving no blood and that kind of thing. So I guess they're trying to avoid being associated with actual cults.
Right.
We might call Mormonism and J-Dubs cults. Harley, would you agree with that? Is that why they perhaps leave the name off? Someone else has written here, I think it's Debbie Cozier, the classic dead men do tell tales tactic.
One interesting thing talking about other religions, while we were doing in the month or two that we actually worked as call porters or literature evangelists, we came to one home that was Mormon, and so they engaged us in a conversation, and then led it to, would you be willing to meet with a couple of their Mormon missionaries? And we said, sure. We were confident in our beliefs, and we said, yes, we'll do that. And so we went through met with those guys several times, went through their whole series. And it's kind of interesting because they start out getting you to agree with several things, with several concepts, and then kind of move you along toward their thing. But at the end of this of the study, they gave us each a Book of Mormon, asked us to go home, read it, and then pray about it. Ask God to tell us whether or not it's true, whether or not the Book of Mormon is true, and that Joseph Smith is a prophet, and the Mormon Church is true. And we would feel a burning in the bosom. That's their term that they use, but the feelings, the Holy Spirit would prompt us to that it is true. And I listened to Mormon Stories podcast. We mentioned that last time, Peter, we were talking.
Great
Excellent
podcast. Yeah.
And that term comes up there. But my friend and I did not experience the burning in the bosom. Probably we were too indoctrinated as Adventists, but we did not experience that. And when we told them that,
yeah,
these studies had been done in the presence of this man and his wife, whose house it was, and we met in their house. The gentleman cried. He was so disappointed.
Wow.
That we had not bought
felt
into it.
Yeah.
So
Moto Sapien has written Moroni 10:4, the warm fuzzy feeling.
And Peter, it appears to me, as I've looked at stories of people, and I watch all kinds of podcasts, a lot of evangelical podcasts, some atheist podcasts. I'm an equal opportunity consumer of those things. It is a very rare situation. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, it does. But when most Christian apologists, when pressed, will say that they joined the church, became a Christian as a result of an experience of some kind. It's not through diligent study, and that's what prompted them. And the diligent study came later to confirm their experience. Again, I can't say that's everybody's, but some very prominent apologists I've listened to will say that's what happened. And it's a little surprising, not entirely so. I listened to one atheist podcast where the guy says his theory is that young men atheists who become Christians, that it often has to do with a woman, but a surprising number do, but they get converted because they have the warm and fuzzy feeling, the burning in the bosom. It might be anyway.
It might be for another person, not
exactly.
for the actual theology.
Yeah. So anyway, but a lot of them do study hard and then find the information necessary to confirm. I mean, when you're a fourth grader and you're taking baptismal classes at your church school, you're not really making an intellectual decision because you're not equipped to do it. So
that's interesting. This, with this interview, we've called it Leaving Adventism, and I've done a few of them in this season, and scattered throughout the whole seasons. What are we, season 5? So scattered through all of them, we've had a few Leaving Adventism stories, and I've got a fair bit of pushback for doing Leaving Adventism stories, where people think that that's all I'm focused on. So I'm going to put together a mini series within the next season called 5 Things I Love About Adventism, and interview people what they love about Adventism and just let them have a good free time to speak. In doing that, I've been trying to find Adventists that are new Adventists that have come into the church as adults and what they love about it. but it's really hard to find new Adventists that come into the church. Most Adventists are generationally in, or their parents came in. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I'm finding it really hard. And if anyone's watching that is an Adventist and became an Adventist, let's say, 25 plus, yeah, contact me. I'd love to interview you.
I saw that someone had commented on either the technological train wreck that I took us on a week ago, or in our test run last night or yesterday.
Yeah.
Somebody commented that they they'd like to hear something along those lines, and I thought, yeah, that's fair, and maybe it's not for someone like him or her to listen to something like that if it's not what appeals to them. I don't have any desire in talking to you about my leaving, and we haven't gotten too deep into it yet.
No.
But my leaving, Adventism, and then eventually belief in God Himself, I don't have any desire to try to convert somebody to my
No.
way of thinking.
No.
I don't mind explaining my way of thinking, but if you, and as I said last time, different people have a different sense. Some people have a much stronger sense, what some would call a spiritual sense, than others do. And those people are far more likely to find God than those who don't have it. And if you happen to be one of those people, good for you, and don't even think of leaving.
Yeah.
If this meets your needs and you feel that you're doing what God's will is for your life, then stay with it. Stay with it.
Yeah. I'm going to just quickly bring up Harley replied. This is Harley Southwell. And Harley, we did an interview together in season 1, was it? The podcast? I think it was way back then. He has written in reply to the questions we asked about the training and leaving the name off a lot of events that Adventists run. Regarding the hiding of identity, it depends on the church running the program, but I definitely do feel public programs are a lot more transparent now than in the past. Most people have never heard of SDAs anyway, so they're unlikely to have bad word association. Aussies are good at spotting duplicity and sneaky dealings, and we hate it. So it does much more harm than good to be sneaky. I agree, Harley. I like that approach. And reminds me of I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier, Arthur, when I was doing music and very involved in the I guess what would you say, outreach, witnessing kind of side of things, I would sing lots at New Age festivals, and I would sing my music. And I remember eventually becoming involved with organizing a lot of the festivals, and a Christian group tried to infiltrate the New Age kind of festival there, and had a stall, and they knew I was a Christian, and they were asking what kind of jargon do they use and how can we pretend to fit in, and as we were walking down one of the aisles where all the stalls were being set up, he stopped me and he said, "Oh, I see that you're not so subtle." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he pointed out that on my jacket on the back was a cross, John 3:16, Jesus saves. And I said to him, "Yeah, they know I'm a Christian. I just sing my Christian music into the New Age community." And so I guess, Harley, yeah, I agree with you. Just be bold, be who you are, don't hide it.
Yeah, be yourself. And if you don't really believe it in your heart of hearts, then don't pretend to. If you do, don't pretend not to. Be bold, be yourself, and if people think yourself, or people can sense if you're being a phony or not, and you're not going to gain anything by being that. You're not going to help anybody. You're not going to help yourself.
Yeah.
So
needless to say, I don't wear that jacket anymore. But I was bold at the time and proudly Christian.
Yeah, well,
can I just bring out one more comment, just so I don't lose the thread of what we were talking about, keeping it in. This is Jennifer Lynn Quick. Just check I've got the right one. They have also worked to rename their elementary schools, leaving off Seventh-day Adventist. They replace it with the word Christian. At first, this seems wonderful, but this ties into the Revelation Seminar meeting situation. Yeah, it does.
You know, I just sent a text to my wife to bring me my laptop because I printed out some notes that I had put together, and I printed out the wrong notes, and I put some notes together in the last 24 hours that laid out exactly the process, what happened when, because we talked before about Desmond Ford, we talked about Brinsmead, we talked about
Yes,
Ronald
yes,
Numbers' book,
yes.
and those were very significant
Yeah,
in my life.
you
Seeing
get
those,
those, and I'll just answer a couple of questions.
yes,
I think Mark Anthony says, I thought you were a Christian. I'm not sure if he's meaning me or you, and he's written interesting. What I was referring to there, Mark, is that when I would go to these festivals, I was interested in proselytizing. I find myself now more, particularly since leaving the Adventist Church, more just kind of reconstructing my whole system. And so I'm interested in asking what other people believe, why they believe it, can they defend it, more than trying to put up placards and signs and bring people into Adventism and into a belief system as I reconstruct mine. But I personally value the four Gospels, the teachings of Jesus, applying them to my life, and I enjoy my family, friends, and local community, and upholding good values. So you found it?
what I was after, which is a very fortunate thing.
Ah.
You know, it is when you think you have a document and
And
it's
then you
gone.
don't, and then you have it again. It's a relief.
Yes, I do
I'll
have
read
it.
one more while you do
Go,
that.
please do.
Someone has written, AUC is now making sure the branding of Adventist schools includes Adventist. Oh, that's good. Yeah, my point before Mark and to others is that, yeah, be bold with what you believe. In fact, I find within the more conservative Adventist branch a willingness to be that bold and upfront with Adventism, and I respect that. Our liberal progressive friends seem to struggle a little bit more with how they're seen and perhaps speaking up for what they truly believe on certain topics. Okay, back to you, Arthur, if you found that info.
I did. Thank you. So when I told you that my ambition had always been to be an Adventist minister, and when in my senior annual for my academy, they list the activities you've been involved in and what your ambition is, and my ambition was still at that point to be a minister. That colporteur or literature evangelist experience kind of put me off that, and I had talked to someone who said, you could take something else, and then if you still wanted to be a minister after you were done, you could go to the seminary and become a minister that way after having had some different education. And when I went to my first registration, they told me the same thing, and so I thought I will do that. I ended up doing a religion minor because I liked studying that material so much, and but that was kind of my first move away from the organized church, though I was still, I think, a pretty faithful Adventist. And again, just like in my academy, my senior year, I was a student week of prayer speaker there too. I mean, I wasn't thought of as somebody who was not into the church. I
Right.
was, and I still believed it. But I think the second big crack for me, because after I got out of college, I went on to law school, and the second big kind of crack in the veneer or in the facade of Adventism in my life was Ronald Number's book. That was very, very difficult for me.
Just
And
holding
that
it
was
up now
published.
for those.
Yes, that one right there, and that's the version I have with the
Yeah.
similarly tattered cover.
It's a really good read. I highly recommend it.
I probably need to get the most recent version because I think it
Yes.
has additional
It
material.
has some additional material that Ron Numbers and his current partner, I think, have included, which is fantastic. I have this original version and the Kindle version of the latest one.
And that's probably what I'll do too, because I love my Kindle, and that would be a good way to read it. I've read a lot of books that way. So that was published in 1976. In light of what we know today, that is a very mild book.
Yeah.
At least the version we first read. It was very mild, but it was very shocking to me. And the church reacted to that very badly, I think. I used to get audio tapes of various sermons and various presentations, and I got several from the White Estate people had been involved in, and they really went after Numbers. It got personal, ad hominem type attacks. I mean, it wasn't necessary. It would have been so much better if they had just said, "Sure, there's some problems, and go ahead."
When I chatted to Jim Wagner a couple of weeks ago, who has a similar trajectory to you, left the church in the 80s, became a lawyer, was deeply involved with some of the Walter Ray material, etc. And when we chatted about ad hominem attacks, where people attack the person, not the ball, A, it demonstrates that they have no argument. They've lost, they've failed, they can't defend their claim. But B, I said to him, why do they do that? Why do they stoop to that level? And he said, because it works. and true, it does. It really does work.
I don't know if this happens in Australia, but here in the United States, when it comes to political election season, negative ads are very effective. Everybody decries them. Everybody says, I wish they wouldn't do it, but they work. And that's usually attacking the other person, not their ideas.
There's a study I recently read. I wish I could find so I could confirm it's factual. But the study was that when you're looking at swinging voters, if you place negative advertising into their sphere, 90%, they are 90% more likely to swing away from. So if it's a negative thing against Biden, they see that negative, 90% of swinging voters, when presented with negative material, will swing away from desiring to vote for that person. That's how powerful being negative is.
Yes, it certainly is. But I certainly felt, in fact, I wrote a letter to, I think his name was Roger Kuhn, who was a fairly important person in the White Estate, after I'd listened to one of his talks, and told him, you're losing people by those kinds of attacks and your unfairness. You're losing me if you keep that kind of stuff up. That needs to stop.
Yeah.
And anyway, the next big crack that came for me, and I printed out this found document, and my wife just brought it to me, that the laptop computer was casting a pretty bright light, and I didn't like that. So, and it had me looking away. But the second big crack really was the publication by Spectrum magazine of an article about the 1919 Bible conference. And someone else had mentioned this at edition 3.
Yeah, just before you go into that, Adrian Anderson has pointed out that edition 3 of Prophetess of Health also has about 50 pages from the 1919 conference minutes.
Yeah.
So that makes it even another good reason to buy it.
And so this was Spectrum magazine published this in May of 1979, and they published 31 pages of some unedited portion of the minutes. And there was a quote in there from a fellow whose name was G.B. Thompson, who was a field secretary for the General Conference. And this quote is from the August 1 of 1919 session. And it says, he says, if we had always taught the truth on this question, we would not have any trouble or shock in the denomination now. But the shock is because we have not taught the truth. And we have put the testimonies on a plane where she says they do not stand. So, I mean, there was admissions. I mean, they were still supporting her, Ellen White, that is. But there were admissions by many people that said, we've presented this perfect person, and they did their best to. I referenced before, the F.D. Nichol wrote a book that was published in 1951 that it's called Ellen G. White and Her Critics. And I've read the book many years ago, but she didn't ever do anything wrong. I mean, it was just this lady was a saint, according to the way he told it. Even the most minor peccadillos were, that's not what happened. It's this. Don't look here, look over there, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that wasn't helpful to me because I was still, I could have been retrieved at that point. But you read something like that and you say, just a minute, this is too much. It is too much. I mean, he had an answer for the shut door. He had an answer for he had an answer for the health visions. He had an answer for everything. Just how it was, and they weren't fair.
And by answering all those questions, I remember reading some of that material and thinking, "Oh, I didn't know that."
Yes,
it raised more questions in my mind.
So this publication by Spectrum was in May of '79, and I didn't have the dates in mind when we talked on the technological train wreck a week ago, but I looked them up, and so now I know the order they came in. Because then in June of '79, Robert Brinsmead published in Verdict magazine an issue called 1844 Reexamined, and I got that and I read it, and I thought he made some excellent points. And then, so the church gets hit with this first, the 1990 Bible Conference comes out, then Verdict magazine in June of '79. One was in March of '79, Verdict in June of '79. And then October 27 of 1979 is when Des Ford speaks at the forum meeting at Pacific Union College. And that caused quite a stir. And I know that I had a cassette tape of that within a very short time because they became available. And the church did not react well to that. Well, pausing there for a moment, October 27 of '79, I am in the middle of reading, and last time you held up the book, The Ostriches and Canaries book by Gil Valentine. And Gil Valentine in his book talked about meetings of the General Conference Daniel Committee. It met at Andrews University in 1966. Now, this is 13 years before Des Ford's speech in 1966. And there was a stalemate in that committee over how to resolve exegetical problems over Daniel that implying that traditional SDA views of Daniel 8:14 were untenable. And speeches were made that said, and he has a quote here, "From an exegetical standpoint, we cannot arrive at the conclusion that Daniel 8:14 refers to the heavenly sanctuary and that the 2300 days end in 1844. And it was becoming clearer, Valentine says, that Ellen White, to this committee, I don't want to ascribe these views to Mr. Valentine, that Ellen White was the only way to support the view. And Siegfried Horn, who was one of the professors at Andrews, Dr. Valentine had access to Horn's diaries, personal diaries. And in Horn's personal diaries from 1966, he said that there were many people. I think he named 5 other people other than himself who agreed with that view, that it was indefensible from the Bible, and that it could only stand on Ellen White. Well, the church did not want that to come out. So when I haven't been giving too many personal opinions, maybe I have, but it seems to me that when Des Ford said the same thing that these other gentlemen had been saying were acknowledging 13 years
Mm,
previously, but said it publicly,
mm,
that the church made a decision, the administrative arm of the church made a decision, and if you could allow me the uh, latitude to give a kind of a paraphrase of John 11:50, I think that they said it is better for one man to die or to be sacrificed for the people than for the whole church to be destroyed. That
yes.
I think that my personal opinion is that's what
Mm,
happened. They
yeah.
decided he was expendable, and it was more important to maintain the superstructure that
Yes.
we didn't want to say Ellen White was wrong.
Yeah.
So
There's a letter between Pearson and Neil Wilson. So Pearson, as you know, was the former president, and then Wilson, Ted Wilson's father, at this very hot time in Adventist history. There's a letter. I think if you look in season 2, Lyndon Rogers' interview, he and I talk about it, where they express that this is all about the questioning of Ellen White's authority, and it needs to stop. And as Peter Veitch has written, the Desford moment was pivotal for him and pivotal for many, because it actually was the line in the sand, and the church hasn't really recovered from that since then. Can I just give a quick plug to Gillian's book? This is volume 5. She's got this 5 volumes on the road to Glacier View, and these volumes really give people an insight into what actually went on and why it was such a pivotal time. And I also highly recommend people read this book. I've read it now, and I've asked Gil to be on the program, and I think he's going to be, but in a couple of months' time. But this book, you see the date 66 to 79, that's such a fascinating period within Adventism. And Gil is very, I'd say, unbiased. He's just presenting the facts. So for those who want to know about this time period that has impacted Adventism to this day, and people say, why do you keep talking about it? Because it's never been truly addressed or truly answered. So if you're interested in that book, is fantastic.
another book by him that I would tout rather highly is one called I think it's just called J.N. Andrews.
Yes,
It's
great
a
book.
I got that on my Kindle and read it, and I've gone back and noted highlights I had put in it. It's refreshing to read someone who, even though I believe he's a faithful Adventist, I think Kendra Holoviak is his wife.
Yeah,
I think he's a faithful Adventist. I've seen
yeah.
him because I go to online to this Sligo Faith and Reason Sabbath School and just remain quiet and never say anything. Don't even turn my screen on. But he usually often is there. But he wrote that book truly as a historian,
Yes.
and not as somebody. You can read some historians' books and you can tell that they're kind of always
Angsty.
making sure to put front and center the
Oh, yes.
church's position on it.
Yes.
And I think
More like George Knight.
Valentine seems very reasonable. I think he writes, as
Yeah.
I say, as a historian without any bone to pick. Or any
And all of
agenda.
those guys have a place. Like George Knight has awakened many minds,
Yeah.
but he's an Adventist apologist.
Yeah.
Gil Valentine is very balanced. Here's the information. And then you've got Ron Numbers, who was historical as well, and just presenting the information. But you could tell he was also a bit angsty about it as well.
Yes.
Hey, I'm going to pause just right
Sure.
there. Remember where you're up to. I've promised everyone that about an hour into our interviews, we have a 5-minute toilet break, because a lot of people have requested it. So here it is, and we'll be back with Arthur Klym in 5 minutes.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. Love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
And we're back. I think that little 5-minute break helps me as well nowadays. The older I get, I could do 3 or 4 hour interviews and never need a break.
I'm disappointed. I see that Barry Ford talked about inviting people to stand in support of the traditional view. I was going to call for do an altar call at the end here, asking everyone to, with every head bowed and every eye closed, please signify that you agree by raising up your hand. But I guess I won't.
I haven't read that. Let's just read a couple of comments, bringing us up to date with while we're away there. Fear has always been involved in manipulation. Whenever you are feeling fearful, you may be manipulated. Just want to add, I was chatting to a few people over the weekend who, what I like about my friends is they disagree with me bluntly, and we're still friends. And they were saying that I pressure people too much to speak up, and some of them just don't feel comfortable speaking up. We were talking about women's ordination, and I was saying, well, if you're a leader and you believe in women's ordination, be proud of it. You can say this is not what my church believes, but I personally support it. And a lot of the leaders write to me and say they all do, but they're just a little bit too scared to speak up. So, again, I'm highlighting what you said earlier. We're not trying to say people have to do anything. We're just sharing our story. Alpha Matter. I don't even think a lot of members are aware of the 1919 Bible Conference. Seems like a lot of members are not interested in SDA history or anything that could cause them to have a cognitive dissonance. Yeah, that's true. It's readily available. And as we said earlier, you can buy on your Kindle the latest Prophetess of Health version book, and it has 50 pages of the 1919 conference in it. You can also find it online. I've downloaded and printed out a copy for myself online as well.
In the SDA archives online, they have the entire the minutes, the typewritten. You see them in typewritten form. It's a long page of documents. I read one of them today, and that's all free. But if you search archives 1919 Bible Conference, you'll find them.
Great. Yeah. And Dale has joined us. I missed the first part of the broadcast. Your guest is crystal clear. Yeah, Dale, I think you were with us last week, and you gather why we've redone it. The audio was just not working. Mark. Mark has said, who is singing this song, Never Be the Same? Mark, that's me. That's my song. And a quick plug, it's available. If you want to go to listen to it on Spotify, just look up Peter Dixon Standing at the Cross. Or there's a sneaky little thing which I thought I'd deleted. If you go into the description, I've got that song for free as a download. Just scroll down in the description notes and you'll see Never Be the Same for free. I thought that I'd deleted that opportunity, but it is there. So, yes, thank you. It is me. My laid-back dulcet tones.
They are good.
That's why I could never be a rock singer. I was too mellow. Barry Ford has written, I remember in 1980, a camp meeting in Goulburn, New South Wales. They had a speaker denouncing Bob Brinsmead's book, 1844 Re-Examined. It's a great book, isn't it? So hard to get a copy of, though. Adrian Anderson, do you have a copy? Can I borrow it? Or did you send me one and I've forgotten? Just another quick Barry Ford. I'd already had problems with historicism, and near the end of this meeting, they invited all to stand in support of the traditional view. I didn't stand. Oh, that's what you were referring to before. Yeah. And what else have we got here? Sounds like lo-fi rather than the metal I imagined he was singing. Yeah, I know. I've got the messy hair. I did used to play in a heavy rock band, but I was the guitarist. What else have we got? Oh, thank you, Angela. That's very nice of you to say. That whole album is album I did in 2004, and it's still the most downloaded or streamed of anything I've ever done, apart from a sleep album I did. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Back to you, Arthur.
Okay, I'll pick up the
Speed.
story.
Bring us up to speed.
Okay, so what I've covered, I talked about Ronald Number's book, then Spectrum magazine, that was in 76. Spectrum in May 79 published some of the minutes of the 1919 Bible Conference. Then in June of 79, the next month, Robert Brinsmead publishes 1844 Reexamined. Then just a few months later, 4 months later, Des Ford gives a speech at PUC, which kind of blows the lid off. And then in January 28 and 29 of 1980, so just a couple months after that, a committee from the church met with Walter Ray to interview him and let him air his information. And I had an audio tape of part of that meeting that came into my hands within a few weeks to a few months of that meeting. And then the Glacier View Conference in August of 1980, just a few months after that. Then October 23 of 1980, the Los Angeles Times published an article entitled, in their paper, entitled Seventh-day Adventist Controversy, Plagiarism Found in Prophet Books. So it's kind of like this tidal wave. And I could see where the church leadership would feel like it was a tidal wave, because then they respond 2.5 months later by John Robertson publishing, and Mr. Wagner talked about that, publishing The White Truth. And then just over a year after that was when Walter Ray published his book, The White Lie. And so, yes, and it just, this, as I said, it was sort of like a tidal wave, an explosion, yes, of all this info. One thing as I was looking at my copy of The White Lie, and I like the dedication. The dedication says, "This book is dedicated to all those who would rather believe a bitter truth than a sweet lie."
Yes.
I thought, wow, that's powerful, powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, there it is. And something else that I found, even though I have a copy, I did a search online, and in a website called Internet Archive, that entire book is there on Internet Archive. So I wanted to so this is all happening, this, one after another of these body blows. And I was at a point in my life where I think I was probably between 26 and 30. And I was very interested in this material, and it pushed me hard and made me think very hard about things. And about that time, the law practice I was part of added a partner, a woman who was Catholic. And after I got to know her well enough to tell her about it, I told her about the Adventist belief about Catholicism, the Pope, and the national and international Sunday laws. I was shocked, not really, but I mean, she barely even knew who Adventists were, and was more amused than anything else that Adventists thought that they were important enough that the Catholic Church was going to come after them. She just, that was the farthest thing from anything she thought could have a ring of truth to it. But it was kind of embarrassing. And maybe I shouldn't have shared it with her, but I was, she was my business partner, and you get to talking, and I told her about that. And that was one of the things that kind of kept me headed on the way out the church door. Because, when you get to a point in your life where it's embarrassing to tell someone what you have believed all your life and what your church believes, maybe you don't belong there anymore.
Interesting.
So here's a humorous aside. I'll tell a humorous aside in just a moment. So all of this was kind of piling up. And then Brinsmead published a short time later, Sabbatarianism Reexamined, or something like that. I thought I had it written down, but he published that. And so this was all kind of, hitting me hard. And Adventists have a way in many services of almost bragging about themselves, how, we're God's special people, the remnant church, and how Jesus is coming back particularly for us, and the universe is fixated on us, not just Christians, not just the earth, but us. And I was tiring of that because it seemed to me to be not unsupported. And I began a client and good friend of mine was a Lutheran, and we began to attend a liberal Lutheran congregation, and that was spurred on by two things. One, that my wife would say to me sometimes when we'd leave church, she says, "Why do you even go? Because you leave angry." And I was angry about some of the things I was hearing because it just didn't seem right to me. And then also, unlike a lot of people I've known of all kinds of churches, a lot of the people I've known, when teenagers become young adults, they may go out and sow their wild oats a little bit. And then when they have children come back, we never did that. We didn't sow any wild oats. We were always going to the church. And it was when we had children that we decided not to remain. And one of the reasons, well, I was beginning to have real trouble with the prophet and the beliefs as well, and other beliefs as well. But I'd mentioned before how I never truly felt part of the community I lived in. I still don't, even though I haven't been a member of the church since the mid-'80s. I still don't feel I am who I am, and I sometimes call myself a Seventh-day atheist or Seventh-day agnostic, because, as I said last time, you can take the boy out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the boy. I'm a vegetarian. I live more conservatively than a lot of Adventists I know. I didn't leave so I could go out and live a wild life and carouse. I live a very staid and conservative life. And so in many ways, I'm still an Adventist. I just don't believe anymore, and I don't go to church anymore. So we went to this Lutheran congregation for a time, and I really liked it because I liked the liturgy. And I became involved, and I was up front singing with the pastor responsively, and it was enjoyable. Gave communion to congregants, the bread, the wafer. I liked it. I don't know, my wife was so enamored by it. But one time we were coming home from church, and our son, our oldest son, who must have been about 8 or 9, he says, "I don't like going to Sunday school." Okay, Graham, why is that? Well, they tell the same stories over and over again, and it's obvious they're not true. What stories are those, Graham? And his answer was, well, first, how about Noah and the ark? And, what do you do? He was a little too smart. And he named a couple of others. I don't remember what they were, but, talking snakes and talking asses, it's kind of hard to defend that. So, anyway, let's see, what else was I going to...
It's sad that a lot of those stories are quite metaphorical and have double meanings. And but because the main thrust is that, these are magical things that have happened, therefore believe. Whereas really I see a lot of these stories, particularly in the 4 Gospels, Jesus' parables, there's a deeper meaning that actually can be unpacked and can actually help your life. You don't have to believe in the magic of it.
Yeah, but the church, conservative churches have a habit of trying to make them as literal as possible. And if I had not left, then I might have left when Ted Wilson became president. When I heard him say, and this isn't an exact quote, but it's close enough, told people that if you don't believe and subscribe to the literal 24-hour, 7-day or 6-day creation, there's the door. You don't belong here. You should get out. That, well, that would have been the final straw. It wasn't, because that straw had already gone by. But that would have done it.
If you'd hung in there that long, that would have. He's certainly continuing on with his father's notion of drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, he certainly has, and yep, that's right. We ended up leaving that Lutheran church after about 8 or 9 years when there was a pastor who was a problem, and a group in the church decided that he needed to go, and I didn't disagree with them. I thought they were right. And one time I met with a group of probably about 15 church leaders, and they wanted to have a meeting where the bishop was brought in, and where he could be told in a congregational meeting what the problems were and why he needed to go.
Right.
And they turned to me and said, "You're a lawyer. You're used to making arguments in public and putting together an argument." They asked me to do it. I did it. I didn't really want to, but I did it, and I agreed with them. But it was hard to. It kind of split the church, and it was hard to feel comfortable or good about it there. And it was about time anyway for other reasons. And so that was the last time, other than for a funeral. And we're going to church this Sabbath afternoon at 3:00 for a funeral of my
Wow.
former dentist, and who actually had played a role, got me on the Upper Columbia Conference corporate board, and with him, and wonderful man, and he knew I left, and we still had a wonderful relationship. Wonderful guy. And he was a very faithful Adventist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to jump back to something else that may have been a little bit of a crack, and that is, we talked about it last time, and it's going several years back, and that is the issue of ingathering. Sometimes people used to call it harvest ingathering at one point, but we'd go out around Christmas time and knock on people's door and tell them that we were gathering money for the poor and needy. And some years later, it was really quite a shock to me when I heard that just went into the church's general fund, that it wasn't targeted or earmarked for for the poor. It was, unless you count pastors as being the poor, maybe they were, but that it was misleading people, and that you start adding that up with other things, and it was hard for me to have confidence in the institution. I don't want to say that that's a basis for disbelieving teachings, but it was hard to have faith in the institution. The church is a corporate, acts like a corporation, no different than any other corporation, in my view.
I think I mentioned last time that in Australia, the SPD is actually a PTY limited company, set up in the early 90s, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that the same in the States, do you think? Or is it
I
just...
think it is. I believe that the church, at least here in the conference here, did, and I'm pretty sure it still does, because I've seen some litigation involving the church and in other parts of the country as well. And I think what we have, there's the corporation, a nonprofit corporation, which the legal arm of the church is, and then the legal arm of the church, I think, as part of its organizational structure, also has the religious wing that may not be its own corporation, but it's kind of under the umbrella, I think. I am not 100% sure.
And a lot of these discussions are just so we can raise thoughts and ideas that we're not totally sure on, so that people can write in the comments and clear things up for us. My understanding is, in this part of the world, it was set up that way because they could see there might be litigation coming around child abuse and that kind of thing. And so setting up as a company helped to ensure that only the areas, it's quite a smart thing to do, I'm not criticizing it, but only the areas where there might be litigation would be affected, not the whole church. But who knows? But the sad thing is, once you set it up as a corporation, whatever the reason, you're going to then follow the path of corporations becoming business-like, and the people becoming secondary. And how do we ratchet this up to be more effective? And so the numbers become hugely important over the people, the pastoral care.
And it's just it's almost inevitable, because, as I say, the church, a corporation can always be counted on to behave like one. It's like I mentioned the last time, I see ads for insurance companies on TV all the time, and they're always telling you how much they care about you. But they don't care a bit. They want to collect premiums from you and pay out as few claims as they can,
Yeah.
all the while claiming that they're really concerned about you.
Yeah. I
And I'm
know.
not saying they're evil. I'm just saying that's how corporations are.
Yeah, and most corporate leaders, everything they say is propaganda. And it
Yeah.
hit me the other day. I was just reading through some of the comments by union leaders and SPD leaders in our part of the world, and everything they post on social media, even on their personal pages, is just propaganda. And I think one of the things, one of the reasons a lot of young people are leaving the church is they want authenticity. They want their leaders to go, "Hey, look, I'm flawed. This is what I think. I might be wrong, but as a system, they just want authenticity." But
Yeah.
the constant, "Hey, everybody, and happy Sabbath, and now we're going to talk about the good work that's been done in the mission fields," and
Yeah.
just starts to grate after a while.
Yeah.
Some,
I go pretty much every week to the Adventist Today Sabbath seminar, and it's not very friendly to Australians because we've had a few, probably 4 or 5 times have had Australian speakers. They have to be up at 4 in the morning or so, something ridiculous like that, in order to do it. I think David Geelan's has spoken. I think you've had him, haven't
yes,
you?
had him on the
Yeah,
program. Yeah,
is very, very good. He
yeah,
But anyway, I'm open there. It's Lauren Seibold's thing, and he's the one in charge. He's the editor of Adventist Today, and he's very open. He's been a friend of mine since college days,
mm.
and he's tolerant of me. Says that he expects me to be in heaven, even though I don't subscribe to the view, and wants me to be there. But they're very tolerant of me, and I'm open about what I think, and they don't seem to mind. I keep thinking, why do I go? And maybe they should. Maybe I should just back off. But it's having, as I said, about take the boy out of the church, but not the church out of the boy. It's kind
Yeah.
of like checking to see what your old family's up to.
Yes, yeah, and it's a fascinating realm, the Adventist
It
realm.
is.
Like, as you know, this podcast is SDAQ&A with the subheading "A Former Adventist Looking In from the Outside."
Yeah.
It is just fascinating. It's an incredible drama from start to finish. Like, well, it's not finished yet, but um, and there's just key time periods that are fascinating, like 1888, 1919, 1957, the whole 66 to 79 period, the Glacier View, all of it is just absolutely fascinating. Politics, drama, intrigue, corruption, good people, good stuff. It's just all there.
And one of the things, though, that I want to point a finger at you a little bit, Peter, and some of your compatriots there. It always seems whenever there's drama that Australians are in the middle of it.
I think at every point.
It seems like it.
That's
I
that's classic. Yeah. I wonder why that is.
Are you
That's
folks just contrary by nature? What's the deal?
if you look at, I've traced back it to the Standish brothers, and I
Yes.
I respect that they, James Standish, if you're watching, hopefully considers me a friend. I respect that his father stood up for what he believed. Like, I've got no problem with that. Good on him. In fact, in many ways, the birthright of Adventism, I believe, belongs to those guys. Anyway, the Concerned Brethren, which I'm not sure if you've heard about, which kind of sprung up, I think, in the early 90s, or the early 70s, as they saw and were concerned about this kind of new theology that was coming through with Des Ford and all the others. And so they started up the Concerned Brethren, who sent off a letter to the then president here in Australia. The Standish brothers were the youngest of the Concerned Brethren. I think they were in their 40s at the time. And they had the energy and the focus and the articulation and the rhetoric. They were really good speakers, very clever men. This is a long story to say that I've
All
found
right.
that every single fundamentalist independent movement has links back to the Standish brothers. Every single one. They all do.
Really?
Yeah, back through, because they started Heartland in America, and Heartland was the the breeding ground for a lot of the real conservative kind of
Yeah.
fundamentalists to spring from. But yeah, all of them, and some of them may not realize they do, but they do. And like I said, good on them for, just standing their ground. That's what I loved about Des Ford too. He was really clear. This is what I believe.
Yeah.
There was no beating around the bush.
And it's worth noting too that while I read Brinsmead's Sabbatarianism Reexamined, and I read his following material where he marched out of belief, and I kind of went out around the same time. Des Ford, even though the church, and I feel a little silly talking about Des Ford since we have a real expert apparently here, but
Gillian is watching today.
yeah, he even though he was spat on and scourged, if you want to put it that way, he remained faithful in so many ways. And they treated him like a dog, and he did not turn on them as he might have.
If you want to examine a life well lived, a Christian life well lived, examine his life. In fact, I'll just bring up something that Gillian just said as it pertains to what we are speaking of. I think this is Gillian's here. The realization, yes, it is. The realization that official Adventism doesn't represent what I believe any longer makes me not want to go. I was not taught traditional Adventism when I came in. I don't believe in the version Ted Wilson pushes, and I don't like pushing his LGT or last generation theology. Pushing LGT men or Standish men into leading positions, such as Andrews in the Review. And also, if I understand it right, determining ahead of time who his successor will be as GC president. I think he is worse than his father, possibly because his mother was very traditional. It would take a large group of senior scholars and administrators going to GC and saying this top-down power play has to stop, but I do not think it will happen. I agree, Gillian, and these guys have tried, as can be seen in watching any of the power play and politics behind the scenes at the Autumn Council or the Annual Council from 2016 on. You can just dip in there on YouTube and find it all. This kind of thing, top-down power, doesn't appear to be going away. It's becoming more entrenched. Having said that, I'm told by a lot of liberal progressives, and was last week on the program, that is changing. So I'm looking forward to seeing evidence of that change.
One of the things that I was really impressed with by this Lutheran church we joined, it was on a major highway where there was a stoplight, and that was a church that the doors were always unlocked, always. The office door was locked, but the doors were unlocked. Sometimes there was theft, but they just thought that was the price of being faithful. And they were open to virtually any community group that wanted to meet there, Alcoholics Anonymous, the works. And I thought that said a lot. Now, I would also say this. When I was looking at the local Adventist church that we used to belong to try to find when the service was for my friend who died, my dentist who died, I noticed that they showed events and things happening, and there were Alcoholics Anonymous meetings being held there. And I thought, well, good on them. That's good. I like to see that. Become more open and accepting and allowing people to use your facilities to serve the community. And that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, I see Angela Lima commented, and she is a regular on Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar.
So what has she said? Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar is absolutely open, and I routinely criticize the church, the prophet.
Yeah.
And I think Lauren Seibel is doing a great thing there with AT. I'd love to have him on the show. He's hard to pin down.
Yeah.
Tim Humphreys has written, it's probably Anglo-Saxon contrarianism, read the drama. That was what we were referring to earlier. Here's a nice thing to say. I don't know if you've picked up on this in your lifetime working as a lawyer. I have to say the last two lawyer guests have totally proven the slimy lawyer stereotype completely wrong. Both have been deep, articulate thinkers.
That's very kind.
And I think Motor Sapien also wrote when Lauren was saying that you'll be in heaven regardless if you believe in it or not. You can be my heavenly neighbor.
Well, I take some comfort when I was leaving, because with, even though I don't believe anymore, with Matthew 25, that seems to me to be the heart of what Jesus taught. And the people who he said were going to heaven were those who had no idea they were headed that direction. They just were there because they treated people decently and with respect
Yeah.
and love. And that's what I think we should all strive to do. And if I don't happen to believe in God while I'm doing it, what difference should that make? And if you happen to believe in God while you're doing, fine. And I that's wonderful that you feel a connection to him or her or it. I just don't feel it, but I still feel a real connection to my fellow human beings.
Yeah.
And if I can help make their lives a little better, at least treat them with respect, then I think we've accomplished something. We've all accomplished something. And
Yeah.
cut each other some slack.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And in light of my conversation I had on the weekend where my friends were saying I cajole people too much, yeah, I'm seeing myself doing that less and less as time goes by for some reason. Dale has written, the Australian country started out as a prison colony. Troublemakers.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh, I like it. What have we got here? Mark Anthony, liberal organising never last long. Conservative traditionalism lasts forever. Religions are of the latter category. If the SDA becomes the latter, it will fall away. Yeah, I agree.
Something I want to make sure that we talk about before we run into any time constraints, and that is one of the problems that I think the church faces, and it's not the only one. I think it's evangelical religion everywhere faces right now, is the issue of LGBT people and the stiff arm that they get from conservative religious organizations. And it's based on scripture, based on ideas of people who lived thousands of years ago. Those same people in scripture defended and said God approved of slavery. And somehow we got to a point in the USA, in the United States, in the middle of the 1800s, the 19th century, said, we're moving past that, folks. Morality, we're going to do what's right, even if there's a scripture that says, if scripture says white is black, we're not going there. We see what's white, and we're going to do what the right thing is.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly younger folk, but I think they're not alone. There are people like me who join them, and that is, when I used to have a lot of pretty homophobic ideas. When I was in academy and college, we referred to people who were gay in very derogatory terms. But when I grew older and learned that two of my very best friends from academy and college, people who I love as great friends, were gay, it was hard. It's hard to hate them. It's easy to hate them, I should say. It's hard to hate us. And so they're friends who, they are friends of mine who I consider to be part of my group. And the fact that their sexuality is different than mine, I can't turn away from them and say, you're them that we should oppose. I consider I don't think there is any them. It's all us. And we need to act that way. And that younger generation, the older generation, you can get by with, a lot of us will remain silent, but that younger generation is not.
No,
That
that's
the
right.
church and evangelical Christianity is going to change, or it's going to die. That's my opinion, and it's only my opinion. But and people say it's in scripture, that can't be changed. We're going to live or die with that. When I was a kid, and you were a kid, Peter, how many church elders were divorced people? The church has changed.
Yeah.
The Adventist Church has changed their view on that, and so has evangelical Christianity, and the Bible didn't change.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
So to say, but the Scripture says, no. The Scripture says when it's convenient for us to stand on it.
Mm.
When it's no
Mm.
longer convenient, uh, uh, we find ways around it, and that's exactly what happened with divorce, in my
Yeah.
view, and slavery.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Well said. So, what
So,
year did you actually leave the church? I remember last week, where we had the technical audio problems. Your daughter was commenting a fair bit. She doesn't appear to be here. I hope she log in the last minute so we can have her
I could
historically
text her.
connected. Tell her to write a comment and say hi.
Yeah, I'll text her while we're
Just so she's
talking
on the
here.
show, because the other one will be taken down.
Yeah, true. Okay. Uh, okay. What I was going to say, what did you just ask me besides her? Oh, when did we leave? Probably,
Yes.
I would say it became official. We joined the Lutheran Church, so we'd been attending for about a year. We joined the Lutheran Church in 1987 because that's when our second son was. No, he was born in 86. Because he was baptized as a Lutheran the day we joined the church, if I'm remembering correctly, and it was in November of 86. This is interesting because a couple of years later, because we hadn't been at the Adventist church for a couple of years, I got a letter from the pastor of our Adventist congregation. And he said he hadn't seen us for a long time. He heard we were attending another church and asked if it was our preference to be removed from the books. He said, and so I sent a letter back to him because we weren't using email at that time. We sent a letter. It didn't exist. I sent a letter to him and said, yes, we have committed to the Adventist church is an act of apostasy, and that is we joined a church that meets on Sunday, and so you should remove us. Thank you for your kindness to me in the past. I have no problem with you at all. Nobody has hurt us or done anything wrong to us. Please rest easy on that. And he sent a letter back about a week later. And what's funny about it is what he said in the letter. Well, thank you, and I appreciate, you've always been, said some nice things about me. And then he said, and if you ever change your mind and want to come back, you will not be welcome. And I knew it was a typo. And about a month later, I got a follow-up letter just so apologetic, saying that, how sorry he was, and that was not intended. But it was obvious from the context that it was a typo. But it was funny. He was a fine man.
When you left at that time, and I've noticed this in my interviews, particularly in season 2, that a lot of people that left or were forced out or felt pushed out, squeezed out, a lot of them didn't keep in touch with each other. Was that your case too? Because to me, there seemed to be a lot of, Gillian has mentioned, I think, if I'm quoting her correctly, that in the 80s, post-Glacier View, around 84, 85, 86, they had up to 200,000 subscribers on the GNU, Good News Unlimited magazine, which indicates there was a high level of interest in what Ford was teaching and doing, and that maybe there was a sense of a desire to have camaraderie. But maybe that was mainly a lot of Adventists who still were in the church but were kind of wanting to just secretly continue to follow Des. But where I'm going with is those that did leave don't seem to have kept in touch that much in this part of the world anyway. Was that your story as well? Did you kind of walk away from connections with former Adventists, is what I'm talking about? Others that left as well, did you lose touch with them?
I think so. It was a pretty lonely journey that we were on. I didn't know of anybody who were local people to us who were leaving. And so it was a fairly lonely journey, and I wasn't in touch with a lot of people. And so, yeah, we felt pretty isolated. I
I
don't
guess
blame
social
anybody.
media wasn't around at all then.
No, Yeah. And
hard
I
to
and
keep
I
in
don't blame
touch.
anybody for that. I think a lot of times when the person leaves, it isn't so much that people want to ostracize you. I think they kind of naturally do, but I
Mm,
don't think it's out of ill will so much it is they think that, maybe you don't wanna have
mm,
contact with them
mm,
or not sure what to say, what to talk about, and so that would be sort of how I view it.
mm,
I've had a couple of clients over the years who knew my situation and invited me back, and I responded by, "Thank you for that. I know you're saying that with an open heart and for the best of reasons, but
mm,
no, thank you."
mm.
So, uh,
I think what I'm trying to find out, and I hear what you're saying there too. I've said this story many times. When I left, a friend of mine that worked at the division wrote to me and said, "Oh, we're going to really miss you." You know, when I left, he said, "Oh, we're going to really miss you," and I said, "Dude, I'm not dead," and we only ever knew each other online anyway. He lived in the States. And he wrote back and said, "Oh, wow, I can't believe I said that. It's so true." So yeah, I don't think they're trying to be malicious. But I guess where I was going is that the those that left, I think Dale Ratzlaff has perhaps done the most to kind of coordinate a bit of a formers fellowship. But when you left, was there any kind of connection with others that had left? Were there other formers that were kind of um, in some way keeping in touch with each other?
there may have been, and I was receiving for a long time the, Proclamation magazine
Mm.
that
But
Colleen
Dale,
Tinker is
yeah.
involved in. In fact, I think Colleen was at college at Walla Walla when I was
Right.
there. But and I enjoyed more reading the letters than I did anything else, and the letters to the editor. But my wife handed me a note. She said they distance to protect themselves so it's not catching.
Right. Right.
And she
Yeah.
may be right. I'm
Good point. What's your wife's name, by the way?
Cheryl.
Hey,
Who's
Cheryl, if you can hear us, hi.
it?
Cheryl, come and poke your head on the screen and say hello if you want
Uh,
to.
I don't think she's going to. When she handed me that note, she was preparing to go to bed and was not, dressed for this.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, hi, Cheryl, and, thanks for that great thought.
She's laughing. She's laughing. Uh, she says, "TMI, too much information." So, um, I think part of it is because, and I don't say this because, "Oh, I'm some super at arguing or anything," but when one is in a profession where you argue for a living, people, I think there may be a little more reticence too because they don't want to get in an argument with you, and because they
Right.
think that if they say something, that they'll get a harsh reply, and maybe I hope I wouldn't, but there was probably a day when I would have.
Mm.
I think I've mellowed a lot over the years. When Facebook first came out, I challenged people on Facebook, and I did more to people who I felt were taking stances that I thought were inconsistent with their
Mm.
Christianity. And there's no shortage of that ever because people are people. But
Yeah,
I was too harsh with a lot of times. And people will say things to each other online that they would never say to each other in public and in
exactly.
person.
In
In
person, yes,
person, or even
exactly.
looking
Yeah.
at them right now the way
No.
you and I are
Yeah,
talking.
yeah.
I might say some things to you in writing that I would never look at you and say. I hope
Yes.
I wouldn't either of them, but
Yeah,
but that happens way too much.
yeah. Peter Veach, who I did a Leaving Adventism interview with a while back, his was from Adventism to atheism, and he has started a group a number of years ago now called SDA Fight Club, which just I want to give a plug to. It can be a robust, but he's great at guiding the Adventists are welcome in the group, and they have some really interesting discussions there.
I visit it relatively often. I have I have a I'm in a job right now where it's a judicial office. I'm not a judge. I'm what's called a court commissioner, which acts as a judge, but is employed by the judges to help them out in their work. And we're required to be nonpartisan. So I've had to pull my horns back in with regard to political comments. And sometimes some of the things on Peter's SDA Fight Club kind of verge on politics sometimes, maybe some negative comments about a certain former president of the United States. I don't know that he necessarily goes there, but sometimes they're on the edges of the comments like that. And it's not that I'm not willing to. I think I just need to watch myself a little bit.
I'm mellowing with age.
I am too.
I quite like it.
Yeah.
I was sitting there the other day at the local cafe looking out across the water and having a nice chai latte and a salad sandwich, and I thought, yeah, life's good.
That's my wife's drink, the chai latte.
Yeah. Does she ask her if she has a dirty chai? That's what they call them over here. Chai with a bit of caffeine.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So what was I going to comment on?
We're talking
that's
about
one thing that it's interesting about how Adventism has mellowed in some respects, and that is when I was a child growing up and through academy and even college, nobody talked about drinking coffee. That didn't happen. And I have a friend who recently retired who is a history professor at Walla Walla, and he sent me an issue of the Collegian, the student newspaper, several years ago, and it was the coffee issue, telling you all the best places to go. And I think they were even serving coffee on campus, I think. And it's just, that blew me away. I thought that is, and I think they have a gay support group club on campus too. And that kind of thing would not have happened. Brian Ness is a professor at PUC, and he's spoken at he's led discussions and made presentations at the Adventist Today Sabbath seminar, and he and his wife are very supportive of gay students at PUC, and it's interesting what the changes that have occurred. They're not official changes, mind you. It's more toleration, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Do you think with these good things that are happening, one can still be an Adventist, even if they've, had struggled with some of the things raised in this book, the plagiarism? A lot of people like I think would like to see Ellen White fall back in the picture a little bit. The more progressive liberals, the more conservatives would like to see her take an even higher stance again, or not a stance, but be placed on a higher pedestal again. That kind of constant tension within Adventism, does that hinder some of these good things happening? Because they'll always come to a head. They always seem, Adventism's this constant loop of Ellen White authority. Ellen White authority.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's kind of in a sense, in one way, it's the strength of Adventism, but in another way, it's a plague on Adventism, and it will. And it's hard to see that changing. It's never going to change when you have somebody like Ted Wilson as president. And because the church is experiencing its great growth and I want to be careful, I don't want to sound arrogant here, but in less educated areas, in less educated countries, let's say, or lower economically, not as successful economically, Ellen White is sold very strongly there. And since I think that's almost the majority, it probably is the majority of the church, it's hard for me to see that changing. There was some years back when Jan Paulsen, and I'm not saying anything, I don't have a clue as to where he is on these things, but just from what I'd read about him, and I see him at the online at the Sligo Faith and Reason Sabbath School, he just seems like a reasonable man, and a man who's not a corporatist.
Yeah.
A man who cares about people. And if we had someone like him, and I don't know where he would stand on Ellen White, but I think he just strikes me as a moderate person who would be a big tent.
Yeah, I think during his leadership, a lot of the liberal progressives felt there was hope. I certainly did. I was an Adventist during that time. I felt there was hope, but perhaps it was false hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nitro Jenks has written, let's face it, if Ellen White falls as a false prophet, the entire church falls. That's why they've kept the waters muddy ever since Glacier View. And I think that's kind of it, because she lent so much of her support, like via God. God said to me that, yes, this doctrine you've presented is accurate. It's really hard to then, if you go to the Bible and the Bible says something differently, I've never seen anything that Ellen White has endorsed via a vision that has become a doctrine done away with, even if it's not aligned with the Bible, even though she says go to the Bible.
Hmm.
It's kind of a nicety to have some things that she said, don't look at me, go to the Bible. And people can say,
Yes.
see, that's what we're Adventists. That's what she said. But show me where is there something that she sanctioned via vision that is no longer believed, apart from the shut door.
There's a comment made online in the chat that I want to respond to, and I'm not going to try to be as agreeable as I can be. Ray wrote, "God demands submission of will. Jesus is Lord. Unless I'm misunderstanding, this gentleman is agnostic and a rebel against God and is in a dangerous spiritual position." I'm going to both agree and disagree with that. I'm going to agree that I'm an agnostic. I'm not going to agree that I'm a rebel against God. And there's a I remember a Christian apologist named Frank Turek, who's still very active, used to say about Christopher Hitchens, who was such a glib and fun guy to listen to. He said that their position was, there is no God and I hate him. I'm not that far, of course, but I don't know. How does a person submit to someone or something that he doesn't sense or think think exists? Maybe, and I suppose, is that rebellion? If 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 you don't, if you've tried and tried and tried, studied and studied and studied, prayed and prayed and prayed, and wanted to have contact with God, and never found him, never saw him, never heard from him, is that rebellion? Maybe it is. That's kind of where I'm coming from. There might be a God. I recognize that. If there is, I don't think I've heard anybody. I don't think I've seen a system of belief yet that really would meet what I think is the standard. Let me say this, though it can be weird at times. I'm so impressed when I hear the Dalai Lama speak. I think when he says, "Don't worry, don't change your religion. Find God in the best way you can." When Pope Francis said atheists can go to heaven, and that that that's the kind of spirituality I can respect. And I don't mean to say I don't respect anyone's spirituality. I just say, when I've tried and tried and tried and prayed and prayed and prayed and don't see it, I don't consider that rebellion. So anyway,
Yeah, if you don't agree with Thor and you don't love Thor, it
yeah,
doesn't mean that you hate Thor.
yeah, and I'm not in rebellion against him.
Yeah, you're not in rebellion against Thor.
So
And that's something I would often say to someone too, is which God are you referring to
right.
if you're saying that you're in rebellion against God? Which God?
Right. I
There's
had a cousin who, frankly, there are people out here who would probably recognize the person's name and not realize that she's my cousin, who I was at a family gathering, and she said to me, pulled me aside and outside and said, "I've heard that you're leaving the church." And she said, "I want to urge you to stay. This is our church too." And what I said to her, I said, "Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I know that's said for all the right reasons. But if the church became like me, it wouldn't be the Adventist church anymore. And I don't have any right to try to change the church to become my way when it would no longer be the church." That was my view, and it hasn't changed.
Can you unpack that a bit more?
Well, for instance, if I had my view at that time was I had been convinced that 1844 was a made-up doctrine, reverse engineered to try to make the Daniel 8:14 mean something, and that William Miller was dead wrong, and that there was a group that hung on because they weren't willing to admit it. And they were led by very, very young people. You say that as you get older, you get mellower.
Yeah.
These were very young people. Ellen White was still a teenager.
Yeah.
And they worked and worked and worked to find an excuse to make it work.
Yeah.
And one of the things they came up with for a while, and we talked about it very, very briefly, was the shut door idea.
Yeah.
If that shut door idea was true, none of you folks are going anywhere.
Exactly.
It's too late for you to be saved.
Yeah.
And it's been 100, almost, it's coming up on
Nearly
200
100.
years too late.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they had to back off on it. And that was one of the other things that really griped me about the church. When I read something like F.D. Nichols' book, he explained that all away.
Yeah.
And it wasn't true. It was, when I read the materials myself, he wasn't telling the truth. Please don't lie to me. Try to persuade me. Try to love me back in or whatever. Don't lie to me. If an institution lies to me, I can't subscribe to a system that was first founded on a lie. And then, well, here we go. I'm sorry, this is going to be very crude, but I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit, use less harsh term. It reminded of a term that says, "Don't pee on my boot and tell me it's raining."
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to, have some respect for me, have some respect for your adherents. Be truthful with them and tell them why you should stay anyway. And let's move on. And, church was founded with ideas that, and the Adventist culture has a lot of positive things about it. It does. SDA potlucks are wonderful. I like being a vegetarian. I'm happy with that. Don't want to eat meat. In fact, when I smell the neighbor's barbecue, it's almost nauseating to me. So, I mean, I'm more careful. I'm a better vegetarian than Ellen White was. So,
and some of the Adventist historians are incredible at revealing, like Michael Campbell with his 1919 and 1922 books. We mentioned Gil Valentine, Ron Numbers. There's so many Advent, whether they're an apologist or not, they've got a real gift for presenting the history of Adventism, which people like myself can go, oh, this is interesting, more information.
I see that Modo Sapien commented on a book by Graham Maxwell, Arthur Maxwell's son. When I was at Walla Walla College, the professor that I took more classes from than any other professor, and I think that would be true even of my major professors, was Malcolm Maxwell, who was one of the sons of Arthur Maxwell. And frankly, I've heard Graham Maxwell speak before. If the voice had been slightly different, it might as well have been Malcolm. They had the same standards, same beliefs, and I liked it. After my week of prayer speech or talk, my senior year in college, I was walking down the sidewalk a few days later and happened to come upon Malcolm Maxwell, and he stopped me and said,
Wow.
you ought to consider going into the ministry. Of course, he would say that because the lines I was the theology I was preaching was his because I'd had so many classes from him.
He needed more.
Yeah, I liked him though.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people comment about him throughout these interviews. People have mentioned him.
Yeah.
What did he put out a book as well? I know Graham did, but did Malcolm?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't remember seeing it. But I tell you, I I want to make it very clear, and I think I've already said it before, but I'm going to say it again. I really loved my time at Walla Walla College. The professors I had, by and large, were excellent. Everybody was good to me, and I just can't say anything negative
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, the Adventist scholars and academics that I've met here at Avondale over in my lifetime, and also in the States, have demonstrated to me pastoral care in many, many beautiful ways. They're kind, considerate, they're willing to listen.
Yeah.
I enjoy having conversations with them. Now, it's probably getting a bit late your end.
Well, I'm
We
yes, but I'm
we've got
enjoying this a lot.
we've
But
got a quick question from
yeah.
Peter Veach. Can agnostics, atheists hold any of the 28 fundamentals?
Peter Veach, I as a kind of a thought exercise, went to the 28 fundamentals recently and read them each, and to see if I could subscribe to any of them, and I was 0 for 28. I mean,
Interesting.
couldn't subscribe to any of them, which I suspect is Peter Veach's position too.
Good to see EJ Thunder watching. He has written several great books actually himself, so go and check them out on Amazon. I like here Mark Anthony said earlier, even Arthur Klym's wife wisely advised him to leave the SDA church rather than go and be angry all the time.
She's a wise person. She's the best person I know, let me tell you that.
She might like to come and do an interview sometime and share her side of the story.
I'll talk to her about it.
That'd be great. I would love it. This book here, Walter Ray's The White Lie, when you read that, it would have been quite shocking, I imagine. Can you give me some thoughts about that? And then we'll close with any thoughts you have on the Fred Veltman study. What did you know about that, and what were your thoughts on it? This sort of 8-year study that in many ways was brushed under the carpet, even though it's fully available online.
Yeah.
Hard to read, though.
It is hard to read. It's pretty dense. And I
Yeah.
don't mean dense in the terms of not wise. It's just it's difficult slogging. You first asked about Walter Ray.
Just did it emotionally impact you? Was it a shock?
It was. And I was prepared for it because I'd been hearing these audio tapes. I'd listened to these audio tapes several times of him meeting with with this Prexad committee.
Well, you don't have a copy of those, do you?
Peter, you had asked me if I do.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for it. I'm not the kind of guy who throws things away. And if you saw our basement, you would say, "Yep, he doesn't."
I would love a copy of that, because they're like, people have talked about them, but no one can find the recordings.
If I can find it, I'll digitize it and get it to you.
Yeah.
So I do have that. I can figure that out. I wasn't very good at figuring this business out, but you fortunately knew the answers. But okay, it did shake me. Walter Ray's, but I'd been kind of primed for it, because this tidal wave I was mentioning, there'd been every wave that came in, it was a series of big waves, and every wave that came in took more sand out off the beach, off the Adventist beach. And the Walter Ray one was a stronger wave than most of them. And it started me very seriously down the path. And the only thing I feel bad about for Walter Ray is I think he would have been more effective if, his anger was evident, and I understand it. This guy had been deeper in intelligence white than almost anybody, which is how he recognized the problems, because he knew her so well, knew her writing so well, and he felt really betrayed. And then when he went to the brethren with it, and they went through this meeting with him, they were going to brush him under the rug as well. They had their heels dug in.
And they'd
There
already
were a
kept him
few.
at bay for a few years too.
Exactly. And there were people like Don McAdams who recognized, and in that committee, he was not antagonistic at all to Walter Ray, as I recall it. But Robert Olson, I think, was the chair of the White Estate at that time, and you could see where he was going with it. That was going nowhere. And so he wrote a book that had an angry tone to it, which I understand, but it would have been more effective had he not. And frankly, I think Steve Daly's kind of in the same boat. He had a lot of powerful material in his book, and I don't want to criticize him personally. He's a pretty smart guy, and he hasn't taken the path I did. He's still very spiritual and religious, but I think his anger showed through as well. And I understand that. I was kind of angry at Ellen White as well when I was reading this stuff, but I didn't publish.
Yeah. When I read the Ron Numbers book, I was reading The White Lie, and I'm talking about the 90s. By the time I was discovered this stuff,
Yeah.
early 90s, I couldn't read The White Lie. I had to put it down, and I didn't finish it for years. But when I read this, maybe a year or so later, I didn't find the anger in there. It was much easier to read.
No.
And I do enjoy reading Steve's material.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed his book.
and he's definitely got the robust nature as well.
Yeah.
His new book that's coming out is going to be very interesting.
I'm looking forward to it on Canwright.
Yes, the Canwright one, and that's going to be a really, really interesting book with Nancy Page, whose grandmother was the co-author with Arthur, I was Canwright's secretary.
Yes.
So we'll have both Nancy and Steve on to promote that.
Let me tell you something that I want to make a comment about Canwright. I had always grown up hearing about how Canwright was so vicious against the church, said that when he left, he was leaving on good terms and he would not attack the church. And that, look, he turned on the church and became this horrible opponent of the church. And then I read one Adventist history, and there are a few good histories that try to play it straight. It was real history. And one of them granted the fact that when Canwright did leave and was gracious and did not attack, but he got set off when there were articles in the review clearly referencing him as Judas Iscariot. And
wow,
that he reacted to that. And can you blame him? I mean, I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, and in reading this J.N. Andrews book by Valentine, one thing that's pretty obvious to me from the early church, the Ellen White, James White Church, is that they referred to it as plain speaking. But what that really was publicly calling people out and really attacking them in public settings and in magazines, in the Review and Herald. And that to me is a little bit, not a little bit, it's way over the line.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's ever really appropriate. And that submission was what they demanded, submission to the spirit of prophecy. So
yes, they seek more submission than
there was one other
to have open dialogue.
There was one other story that I want to get out here because I know we're wrapping up, and that is there was a in the Valentine's book about J.N. Andrews. There was one story about how the staff of the of the Review had been working 6 days a week, just really working hard.
I'll just bring it up while you're sharing the story.
Yes, and they decided that they needed to have a day off and to have a picnic. And so they had this picnic, and Uriah Smith, who was the editor at that time, said that it was I'm trying to see if I can find it, said it was gratifying because there was no mirth or fun, and that they thought that was really the appropriate thing that they had. And Ellen White made a comment too, and I wish I could find it right now. But basically it said nobody had fun, nobody laughed, nobody played games. It was great. I thought, oh, okay. I don't think I would have been very happy in that church.
Joy be gone.
Exactly.
Hey, just to wrap up and have a quick think if there's anything else you wanted to just close on. I'd love to get you back, so we don't view this as the last of our conversations here on SDAQ&A. Someone did say, can you go a little deeper? This is Dale Hutchings on the difference between tolerance and acceptance.
Well, sure. Okay, I don't know. In my mind, I think they're different, but as I think, I guess it depends what you mean by acceptance, I guess. I don't expect anybody to say, well, if Art Klym believes it, then I believe it. No, come on. Don't be yourself. And do what seems right to you. I know people. There was an assistant to one of the deans at Walla Walla College when I was there who became almost a mother figure, a mother figure to me. I spent a lot of time talking with her, and she was one of these people who she really had, at least what she believed was a relationship with God. She was constantly in communion with him. And I don't have any doubt that she was sincere. And it's not for me to say whether it was real. It was real to her. And that's what really mattered. And but I could never make it real for me. Did I tolerate her or accept her? I did both, but they're not. The question inherent in the question is this idea that they are not the same, and I agree they are not the same. But I'm having a little difficulty saying what I think anybody should do. What I would hope that from people there are people on here who are agnostic and atheists. There are people on here who probably are faithful Adventists. There are other people who are true believers, but just not Adventists. And I would say that the Matthew 25 Jesus has room for all of us. Now, you can go through the Bible and you can pick out. It's not hard to pick out for people to pick out things that say Arthur Klym's going to hell. Read this. But there are other places that I think are much different. And I think that Matthew 25 is one of them. That's what I focus on. And let me say one other thing. I would never, and I'm really starting to riff now, and I don't know whether to apologize or just roar ahead.
Go ahead. That's what conversations are.
One of the things that struck me about all this is I have 3 children. My 3 children don't agree with me on everything. They agree with me on several things. They don't agree with me on everything. I don't expect them to. In fact, there would be something really wrong if they agreed with me on everything. It would mean that they're not their own persons. They have different experiences than I have. And they're going to look at, like everybody I used to use in jury trials, I used to argue to the jury, everybody looks at life through their own set of glasses. And that policeman looked at that person doing this, assuming he was committing a crime, and he may not have been. You need to look at it through a different set of glasses, not the policeman's glasses. And we all do that. We all look at life through our own set of glasses. These 3 children of mine, I cut them an awful lot of slack. And I think that's part of what a dad does. And they're all good people. I cannot imagine anything any one of my children could ever do that would make me think that they should be waterboarded, which is really kind of what the flood was. Or burned to death. Even if it's only for 3 minutes. I could never do that.
No.
And I think anyone who would expect me to want to do that is a very sick person.
Yeah.
And my view was, and again, now I don't want to be an evangelist. I'm not trying to talk anybody into anything, but I won't worship a God who I'm better than.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think I'm worthy of worship. And
Mm.
if I'm more open-minded than God, not interested in that God. Now, if
Mm.
I was worshiping a God or found a God, I have a feeling it would be a different God than some of my old Adventist friends.
Mm.
And I do think that everyone worships a God who's very similar to themselves.
Yeah.
Now, they used to say if you get 10 lawyers in a room, they're not going to agree on anything. They'd say that about rabbis
Mm.
as well. But that's true of Adventists as well.
Mm.
Everybody has their own little slant. And is it their God? Is it one of them is right and the rest are all wrong, or are we all creating a God in our own image? I
Mm.
used a term, little statement last time, and I'm jumping all around here, but you've encouraged me, Peter.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that is,
Continue.
I've heard, and if those who didn't hear it before, I think it's worth repeating if they did hear it. And that is, I heard a Jewish rabbi scholar speaking on a YouTube video once, and I enjoy listening to these. Jewish scholars are very good. And he said, Jews use the Bible to start the conversation. Christians use the Bible to stop it.
Mm.
And that's what Adventists have historically done with Ellen White. That ends the conversation and ends the thought processes as well, because you don't need to think about what is right and wrong. Ellen's told you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it ends the conversation, doesn't
yeah,
it? Yeah, wow,
yeah.
that's a great line, that one. Can you read that again, roughly, paraphrased, but what the rabbi was
Yeah,
saying?
he said, Jews use the Bible to start the conversation.
Mm.
Christians use the Bible to stop the conversation.
Mm. Wow, boy, that's interesting, and so
And
sad. It should be,
because
the other way, not the other way around, but it should be that Christians also use the Bible to start the conversation.
yes, they should. We should.
Mm.
I say, I'm not one, but I identify.
Mm.
Um, a book that I really enjoyed was by a liberal Christian whose name is Tom Stark, Thom Stark, and it was called The Human Faces of God. And if you have a infallibility view of the Bible, don't read it,
Yeah.
because you won't have one when you're done.
Mm.
But he comes to a very reasonable, he approaches the Bible, points out all of its flaws, says the Bible is an argument with itself, but he salvages something at the end. And it's a
Mm.
salvage job that I think Adventists should try to do with Ellen White.
Mm.
When we were at the Lutheran Church, Lutherans almost never, at least this brand of Lutheranism, almost never quotes Martin Luther. It's extremely rare. And when they do,
Mm.
it's not as an authority. It's just saying, well, here's one person that says this.
Mm.
And I think that's where Adventism needs to go with Ellen White. I don't think it
Mm.
can, but I think it needs to. I talked about before, I had a mother who I love very much. She's been gone for 15 years, but she was my mother. I hold her I'm half of her. So if I attack her viciously, I'm attacking myself. But I don't worship her. She's my ancestor, a very close ancestor, and I accept her as that. But I think the church needs to take Ellen White that way. She
Mm.
was the church's mother. She made a lot of mistakes. She's not right on everything. My mother wasn't right on everything. She was right on a lot,
Mm.
but she was wrong on a lot of things. Except that Ellen White was a human being who performed a leadership role in the early church, made mistakes, made some good moves too.
Mm.
Keep moving. The church always claims it's seeking and always looking for new truth, but it always slams on the brakes if it bumps into Ellen White.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, even the Mormons, the Mormon apologists are putting Joseph Smith into perspective.
A lot of them are.
Yeah. I don't think I can't think of any prophet in the Bible wasn't for his time or her time. Ellen White is for an ongoing authority. That troubles
Yeah.
me.
Huge mistake.
Yeah.
Huge mistake.
I'll just
So,
bring up, let's see, who wrote that? Mevin Whitaker. Hey, Mevin, glad that you're watching the program today. Let me know next time you're in Coorombong. Would love to catch up. Mevin is saying that he visited Walter Ray on the way to the 1980 General Conference. He gave me the full tapes of the Ray presentation to the scholars, and I donated my set to the Avondale Library. Okay, so that's the Prexad tapes, is it, Mevin? Let me know. I'm about to go and visit the White Estate and the Heritage Centre in the next week or two. They've invited me to go and have a look. And
here it's right in your backyard.
Yeah,
Peter.
exactly. So you keep looking, though, because
I
they
will.
may not let me take them out of the library to record them.
Right.
I do have to get going. We've got this game tonight.
Good.
The Matildas versus the Irish team here in the World Cup, the Rugby World Cup. My sister-in-law is over from Ireland with her 2 kids and husband, and my wife and myself and my 2 girls are all going to head off.
May I ask you a question, Peter?
Yes, certainly.
Who are you rooting for?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. My poor daughters have been asking me all week, Daddy, who do we barrack for? Because they're kind of Aussies, but their mum's Irish, and they're very they're like, are we with the concerned brethren or with the Fordites? We can't work it out.
I used to be embarrassed when I'd go if I went to a baseball game with my mother, because she would cheer any good play, and it was the other team doing it. That embarrassed me. But I'm starting to turn that way.
Yeah, I might have to do a bit of that tonight.
Yeah.
Hey, look, it's been really great having a conversation with you again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Peter.
going the extra mile and buying the mic there. People have asked me what mic actually that you bought just off air. They've sent me some private messages. So I've told them it's a Blue Yeti and it's a Logitech high definition webcam.
Right.
And if I interview you, people out there watching, maybe buy a Blue Yeti and a Logitech. Not that I'm getting any affiliate marketing for that, because it has made a huge difference. And it's been really great conversation. If you think of anything we didn't cover that we needed to, that's fine. A couple of months' time, let's have another conversation. Maybe when you find those tapes. I'd love to talk more about the Fred Veltman, Walter Ray era.
Yeah.
I think that'd make for a great conversation. So thank you, everyone, for watching. And don't forget, you can support the channel in a variety of ways. One of them is just simply to subscribe. If you're watching via YouTube, just do it right now. Just lean forward, click the like and subscribe button. Same on Facebook. It really helps. Or you might like to go and make a donation. 3 people have donated during this interview. I'll look forward to usually the PayPal sends me an email with their email address, and I'm terrible. I don't reply and say thank you. I need to get organized. Peter, get organized. So thank you again, Arthur. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I'll look forward to chatting with you again.
I've enjoyed it.
It's been great. Next week, I think we're chatting to Brian Patterson, who was involved with the 70s gospel music movement here. He and his band at the time in Australia had a couple of top 10 hits. He was in a band called The Executives. He became a Seventh-day Adventist. He helped the music scene, the gospel music scene, in that revolution that happened in the 70s. And he's going to be on the show, I think, next week. Till next time, and have a good sleep, Arthur.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
See ya.